A second term, he's expected to highlight his administration's economic wins and propose future policies, including a hike in the corporate tax rate.
He will also likely touch on the hot-button issues of immigration, abortion, and foreign policy, and is expected to draw a contrast between himself and his predecessor and likely opponent in November, Donald Trump. But as much as this speech is about policy, it will also be about presentation, as polls show that most voters believe Biden is too old for the job. And Joe, you are there in Statuary Hall where all of it is happening. This evening is about policy and presentation. Yes, it is also about pomp and circumstance and atmosphere. What is the atmosphere right now?
Yeah, we've got plenty of that to go around here, Kailey. It's a bit of a noisy room and a festive one here in Statuary Hall, which is just outside the door to the chamber of the House of Representatives. Speaker Mike Johnson just came through, as many lawmakers from the House and Senate have already made their way inside the chamber. They're milling around now, waiting for the President of the United States. Joe Biden will soon be piling into the motorcade and making his way to the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, where we are waiting here. To your point, Kailey, there's a lot on the line tonight. We're going to hear about policy, but so many people will be watching his posture, his tone, his ability to seem energetic, as Chief of Staff Jeff Zients said. And there are some folks wondering if he'll find the spontaneity that he did last year to try to work this room, Kailey, and the people at home.
Yeah, ad-libbing was a big factor in last year's address, and to what extent will it be this time around remains an open question. Some members who were on the rowdier side last year said it depends on what exactly the president has to say, and he very well could have a lot of substance to say this evening. And joining us now with a little bit more on what we do expect to hear from President Biden is Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern, who is down from New York. And Anne-Marie, obviously this is a president who in some sense is not only giving the last State of the Union of what could be his first or only term, but also the first real address of his re-election campaign.
Absolutely. I think this will start as a report to Congress and the American people, and then it's going to be about what his vision is if he was granted another 4 years. So to Joe's point, the first thing he needs to come out is not really so much what he says, but how he says it. Is he going to look strong? Does he look like an individual who can handle at 81 years old another 4 years? Because polls after polls continue to show that Americans think he is just too old. Our poll for swing states, and these swing states are going to decide the election, say 8 in 10 of those voters think he is too old. The New York Times over the weekend, overwhelming amount of people, voters that voted for him in 2020, say he is, quote, just too old. So this is his first issue. And then there's going to be, then you get to actually the policy and the substance. And when you get to that, he's going to be a long list of why he thinks he is better for the country than former President Donald Trump.
Yeah, so part of it is going to be about drawing that contrast, even though he won't necessarily name him. And we did get some excerpts of the president's planned speech, and essentially he was alluding to the fact that people see things differently. Some see retribution, whereas he views it differently. We also got some remarks, though, Anne-Marie, specifically about reproductive rights. That could be pretty telling about the stance the president is going to be taking on the issue of abortion.
And I think it was telling that in this excerpt we got 3. The first one was about abortion. So this clearly shows to me that Democrats are preparing to spend a lot of money and to focus on the issue. The president is planned to say in these remarks, in its decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court majority wrote, quote, "Women are not without electoral or political power." No kidding. Clearly, those bragging about overturning Roe v. Wade have no clue about the power of women in America, but they found out when reproductive freedom was on the ballot and won in 2022, 2023, and they will find out again in 2024. He's alluding to these, quote, red waves Republicans said they were going to have, but then they lost because of abortion. Ohio, Kentucky, Virginia. And he's going to want to remind voters the Supreme Court has 3 conservative judges that overturned Roe v. Wade thanks to former President Donald Trump.
And, of course, all of the justices on the Supreme Court will be present tonight together with this joint session of Congress. Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern, thank you so much. Now, of course, in anticipation of tonight, we've had a lot of conversations here on Bloomberg TV and radio with politicians, pollsters, and strategists discussing what exactly Biden needs to accomplish in tonight's speech. Here's what some of them have told us on Balance of Power.
first is lay out a very clear vision of where he's going to take this country, and that is incredibly important. The second thing they've got to do is start to draw the contrast between them and Donald Trump and the Republicans.
He has to paint the picture of what 4 more years of Joe Biden will be and what the hell that 4 more years of Donald Trump could be.
I think he's going to probably lay out a contrast of if you want democracy and you want freedom for make a choice on reproduction or reproductive rights, like I'm your person, against someone who's not.
I want to hear the president talk about the issues that are front of mind for so many Americans, and certainly, that begins with our fundamental freedoms, the immigration challenges, the need for border security and immigration reforms.
American people are looking for his message on immigration, and they're looking to see if his age really does matter.
He's got to be vigorous. He's got to be strong. He's got to be clear in what he wants to achieve over the next year, over the next 5 years.
This is one of the only things he's going to have with the whole country watching to go straight at it and convince those people that he's up to that job.
Just some of the voices we've heard over the past couple of days here on Bloomberg TV and radio that have brought us to this point now in the House of Representatives. We just had the entire Senate walk past us on their way in. I can tell you that Mitch McConnell just walked in very quietly behind Vice President Kamala Harris. And as we wait for everyone to get in position here for the president's arrival, we assemble our panel in our Washington bureau. Rick Davis is with us, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. Rick, you've done a couple of these in your time. It's such a contrast to see members like Josh Hawley enter the room, to see Mike Johnson, followed by Mitch McConnell, representing a much older style of politics and an older style of Republican conservatism. Is this going to be his last State of the Union tonight?
I don't know if it's going to be his last State of the Union, but this is really a historic occasion. As you point out, in a land that is incredibly divided by politics, the parties are even incredibly divided within their politics of their parties. And so this is a pretty divisive time. So here you have President Biden coming into the very symbolic job of reporting to the nation the status of the nation, and you're doing it in a chamber where the parties don't even get along with each other, nevertheless against each other. And so the reality of tonight is it's not just a political speech, it's not just a report, but it is historic, and I think you feel that in the Statuary Hall.
And right now we are seeing Vice President Kamala Harris walking into the chamber, greeting members as she goes. Both the Senate Majority and Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell are behind her, followed closely by Senator John Thune, who, of course, is the #2 Republican in the Senate. As they make their way down to listen to the president's speech, so, Jeannie, it reminds us how everyone is there for this moment in terms of Congress, Senate, the Supreme Court justices. And of course, this is a moment for President Biden in which he has the attention of tens of millions of Americans during what is, frankly, now a general election campaign. What does he most need to say to them this evening?
I think what he needs to talk about are 2 big themes. Number one, economic populism. These are themes that are near and dear to Joe Biden's heart. These are issues involving the economy, certainly, but giving back to the working and middle class. So we're going to hear a lot about corporate taxes. We're going to hear a lot about taxing millionaires and billionaires and using that money to fund programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, prescription drugs, and all the domestic programs that he wants to fund. That's critically important. But I think the other, even more important theme potentially is going to be freedom. That's freedom at home in terms of things like you and Anne-Marie were talking about as it pertains to reproductive freedoms, and also freedoms abroad. We have the Swedish Prime Minister as a guest in the First Lady's box. Sweden going to NATO. He is going to talk about the need to fund Ukraine. So it is going to be a speech that leans heavily on these issues and should. Economic populism and freedom, because there is nothing more important in the United States to Americans than liberty and freedom. And Joe Biden is going to play on that and try to, in your words, contrast his vision of the United States from his predecessor and potentially future President Donald Trump, who is, he says, wants to return us to a day that doesn't celebrate liberty. And he's going to use reproductive rights as an example of that, where Republicans have tried to take that away from women across the country.
We're now seeing a live view of the Speaker's rostrum for those of us joining on Bloomberg Radio. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and Vice President Kamala Harris have both arrived in the rostrum. This is the backdrop for Joe Biden's speech tonight. Of course, they'll both be over each shoulder when he arrives and delivers his address. They're getting a look at the room, as Mitch McConnell now is as well, as we show images of the minority leader standing alone in the chamber on the floor ahead of this speech. Jeannie's talking about security, Rick. Based on excerpts that Bloomberg News has received from this speech, the president will not call out Donald Trump by name. He will talk about lessons he's learned to embrace freedom, and will say some other people my age see a different story, an American story of resentment, revenge, and retribution. Rick Davis, that would follow a tradition of not calling out your political opponent from the Speaker's rostrum. Is that the right move?
Yeah, I think so. So many of our political norms have been broken over the last couple of decades, and I think it's very impressive that the president's sticking to this one. It would be quite a news topic and maybe politically his advantage to go after Trump by name on any given issue, whether it's Ukraine or the border, dividing the country and talking about how we are in decline. These are all things that Joe Biden could do, but he's not going to do that tonight. He's going to try and create the contrast on his own terms, and I think that's probably a good idea. I think that, trying to stay above the fray as long as he can, realizing that this could be a presidential campaign that's sort of a race to the bottom at some point in time. And so, obviously, his ability to stay off the bottom is going to be key.
Absolutely. As we're still seeing members coming in to the chamber here, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Markwayne Mullin. We saw the entrances of Senator Elizabeth Warren, Mitt Romney, Joe Manchin, notably. The latter two in that have announced that they are not going to attempt to return to the Senate, both of them retiring from this body. And as we, of course, await eventually the arrival of the President of the United States, to this point, Jeannie, about him not calling out Trump by name, still trying, though, to draw this contrast. And we know that one of the ways in which the Biden campaign has tried to do that is to talk about the future of democracy. We've touched on this issue, but at the time when voters are very concerned, polling shows, with kitchen table issues like the economy, like the border, how much is that democracy argument the president might try to make tonight going to resonate?
I think, and the campaign believes it will resonate. They think once people realize, of course, we're just after Super Tuesday when we have a presumptive nominee in Donald Trump. So we're just getting to the general election stage now. And the campaign really believes that once voters have a chance to contrast these two men, they will think about things like January 6th and not take a chance that we are going to return to something like that. Because Joe Biden is firmly convinced that if Donald Trump doesn't win the election, he once again will not concede, and he may again try to resort to violence to make a stand. So they're going to keep talking about that. But to your point, they have got to talk about issues involving the economy and things that Americans care about, including immigration. That's something that they know. And economic populism is very much in Joe Biden's wheelhouse. And I think he's got to talk about it without using the word inflation, but talk about the cost of living and blame that on corporations who have used rising costs to, drive up the costs. And we're going to hear the president talk about that, and he should. Same thing, immigration. So these are issues that he can talk about, but in his mind, they are all under this general theme of our democracy is at risk and we need to save it.
All right, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino and Rick Davis are going to be sticking with us as we continue to bring you extended special coverage of the State of the Union speech. That will continue next, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Next time on The Deal.
I realized a long time ago that being a football player or an athlete, you can get into a room, but once you get in the room, you have to prove that you belong there. But what keeps you in the room, right? It's your talent. It's the talent that a lot of people don't see or don't think you have because they've only seen you in one way. And for me, the biggest pivot was getting out of my own way, telling myself that I'm more than just a football player.
Or other authorities.
Could face bigger challenges.
Britain's next.
It was going to keep rain World Cup. This is a 3.
As the economic picture.
Covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
This is special global coverage of the State of the Union address on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Mathieu, live on Capitol Hill. Kailey Leinz with us in Washington, along with our panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, back with us as we prepare for the speech from Joe Biden, scheduled for roughly 15 minutes from now. He's making his way, or will soon, in the motorcade up here to Capitol Hill. And it's a reminder, Rick Davis, that we talk about a lot of tough stuff around here in Washington, and this is a House full of division as I look around and see Democrats and Republicans who are not going to get along and not agree with the president on every issue here tonight. But this is an important night. It's the Oscars, the Super Bowl of politics, and it's the one opportunity Americans will have until the convention to hear from Joe Biden when it comes to his plans for the future. Can you talk to how important it is about what we're about to see?
Yeah, I think everybody agrees that this is one of the advantages of incumbency, is you get this moment as the leader of our nation, as the leader of the free world, to come to the well of the House and give a report on the status of the nation. And in so many years, it's the status of the world, because so much around the world affects us. And it will be seen by tens of millions of people, and by the way, by even hundreds of millions of people the day after, because I think, as we all learned, the day after the State of the Union is usually where the debate begins. And that's when people really learn and dissect what was in this speech. We'll do our best tonight to do that, but we'll be doing it for the balance of the weekend, because there's so much usually packed into these speeches. There's something for everybody. And, of course, it'll go viral as it's being given. And tonight is actually even more special, because it's really the first time a sitting president has known exactly who his opponent was going to be prior to an election giving a State of the Union. This is a late State of the Union. Normally they're at the end of January, early February. And so now that the field is set, not only is this a president's task, but a candidate for president who knows who his opponent's going to be.
Absolutely. And to that point, he is asking Americans for another 4 years, Rick, in addition to reflecting on what this administration already has accomplished. How does he need to split the looking backward versus the looking forward? Is this so much about selling what you've done or selling your vision for the future for Biden?
Well, this is a particularly hard thing for Joe Biden, because he actually has one of the lowest approval ratings of a president at this stage of his presidency going into an election. So he really does have the task of convincing people that he's done more than they maybe appreciate for the last 3 years, and that, for instance, in his case, the economy is much better than they think it is, and he has to use the best aplomb he can. Uncle Joe has to be able to talk across that kitchen table to convince people that the future economics of this country is in solid footing because of his presidency.
We're seeing live pictures from the White House now. For those of you with us on Bloomberg Television, our radio listeners can picture Joe Biden and the First Lady getting into the motorcade here. And this is an interesting ride from one end of Pennsylvania Avenue to the other, as they will likely be putting finishing touches on this address. A point of flourish, maybe a line they argued about before that speech, is again loaded into the teleprompter. We all remember a night, of course, when the wrong speech was loaded into the teleprompter for President Bill Clinton. When we consider spontaneity, Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, which is a gift that not all of us have, in front of a room like this, at the end of a day like this, for someone who has been criticized for not having the energy to do the job, how important will this be for him to find those moments like he did last year?
critically important. And I'm so glad you mentioned last year, because that was a very strong moment for Joe Biden when he took on Marjorie Taylor Greene and the heckling and responses from Republicans, and he won on that score. And so that quieted momentarily concerns about, is he up for the job? And of course, the White House and the campaign are hoping that tonight he has another moment like that. He is able to do the same thing. They keep saying he can. Let Joe be Joe. But of course, that comes with a lot of risks, because of course, if he stumbles, those viral moments can come back to haunt you. So this is going to be the big challenge for Joe Biden tonight.
Well, it also becomes a question of whether he's going to have the opportunity to ad-lib around that, because that would be reactive to something that is happening in that chamber. Rick, should we expect something similar to last year, where he was able to elicit responses from specifically Republicans listening to the address that he was able to spin in his favor, or will they be more controlled this time around?
I'm pretty sure the conversations in the caucus have been this week, let's not give Joe Biden any opportunity to take advantage of us and our politicalization of his speech during the speech itself, and take away that opportunity, because it was really Republicans who gave him the moment in his speech last year around saving Social Security. And these are smart Pauls. They're in that room because they've been successful in politics, and they know better than to engage a president of the United States in the middle of an election cycle, from the biggest podium in the country, and allow him to take advantage of it. So my guess is tonight will be a little calmer than maybe what we've seen in the past.
It's interesting, Rick. Lauren Boebert just walked by our position here a short time ago. She walked into the chamber alone. She was relatively quiet, had a couple of brief words with some of the folks on the rope line here. And you do wonder if she would agree with you right now, or not be able to resist the opportunity to have that viral moment you previously described, when hundreds of millions see clips tomorrow morning on Twitter, because you can raise money on that. Jeannie, isn't that the point?
That is the point. Rick talked about the fact, and he's right. I'm sure Mike Johnson and the leadership said, now, come on, don't give him that moment. But to your point, Joe, are they listening? And that's the big question. And by the way, it's not just on the Republican side. Let's not forget, a big challenge for the Biden team is on the protests they have been getting over their policy vis-a-vis the Middle East. We have seen protests of people, everybody from the president, vice president, Adam Schiff, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So, will there be somebody on the other side who speaks out? They're trying to preempt that, of course, with this policy that they announced earlier today, and the president's got to talk about building this pier, which will allow for more import of food and other humanitarian aids and goods into the Gaza Strip. But who knows if it will be enough? So those kinds of moments are ones that they're trying to preempt on the left. And of course, on the right, he feels like he can handle them the way he did last year.
Well, in Israel and Gaza, Jeannie, is just one of the foreign policy discussions the president is going to likely try to incorporate in this speech, as well as the issue of Ukraine, considering he is addressing lawmakers, specifically those in the House, where it is unclear if they will ever advance more funding for that American ally, even in the aftermath of this speech. How heavily should he feature that tonight? And is this also about convincing the American people why that is important, not just their elected representatives?
Yeah, it absolutely is. He is going to call for the Republicans in the House to pass Ukraine aid. The sort of astonishing part of this is that most of them agree with it. But if they indeed were to show that by clapping or something like that, Donald Trump is live tweeting and fact-checking, he tells us, this entire speech. So they've got to be careful on that score. But I think the president will raise it. It's going to be part of his freedom agenda. And he is going to be differentiating himself and his administration from Donald Trump, saying, we are the ones who have welcomed allies. We have now Sweden. None of us thought Sweden would join NATO several years ago. They have become the 32nd country to do that. That is under the president's watch, and he's going to make the case, and should, that this is good for the United States. It's good for our security and our alliances around the world. And I celebrate that, as do most Republicans who are not MAGA and following Donald Trump. He won't say Donald Trump by name, as we know, but that'll be the implication as he tries to contrast his administration and his vision of the world from that of his opponent.
We're awaiting the president's arrival here on Capitol Hill now. If you're just joining us, welcome to special global coverage of the State of the Union address. I'm Mathieu, live from Capitol Hill. Kailey, Leinz, Rick Davis, and Jeannie Shanzano with us in our Washington bureau here at Bloomberg, with much to follow here in roughly 10 minutes time, unless he's on time. The speakers of the House, who we're seeing now on Bloomberg TV, will introduce the president after he makes his way down the aisle. You'll hear the famous Mr. Speaker call from the Sergeant at Arms, and he'll take the long walk down the aisle, shaking hands and likely a few hugs with allies, and maybe having some words with some of his political foes as well. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our panel, with us. Considering the guest list tonight, Shawn Fain is going to be in the First Lady's box, Rick. And this is interesting to me. The head of the UAW here in the hall tonight, as the president tries to make the point that he's the most friendly to labor president in American history. But Donald Trump, of course, is heavily supported by the UAW's rank and file. What's Joe Biden's message to them tonight?
Yeah, look, I think he's going to reiterate what you just said, Joe, that he has been the friendliest president to organize unions, maybe in the history of the union movement. He's going to talk about the things he's done to create jobs in America. He's got a bit of a checklist to go through on that, talk about his infrastructure plan that'll help create jobs. But look, I mean, at the end of the day, the question really is, I think, how will the unions really be able to impact this election? As you point out, a lot of rank-and-file union members are the perfect profile for MAGA members, for Donald Trump stormtroopers in a lot of these states. And so in a state like Michigan, where the UAW has a particularly big impact on the electorate, you really wonder, can the union deliver the goods? Part of what made them so politically powerful is that if you got the endorsement of Shawn Fain, you got the rank-and-file voting behind him. I think those days of that kind of political discipline are over.
Well, and Shawn Fain will be a guest of the president in the First Lady's box. Jeannie, he also will have two women who have been personally affected by state restrictions when it comes to reproduction. One woman from Alabama who was affected by the Supreme Court's IVF ruling. Another from the state of Texas, Kate Cox, who had to leave the state to get an abortion that was medically needed for her. We are seeing people standing now in the chamber as we are awaiting the arrival of the President of the United States. And it's worth noting, for those watching on Bloomberg TV, you have probably already noticed this, but for radio, a great deal of women in the chamber are wearing white. And we understand that that is an effort to take a stand on reproductive rights in particular. Jeannie, you touched on this at the beginning, how President Biden is very likely to focus on those freedoms. He notes, though, and we've seen this in the excerpts that were released ahead of this speech, a lot of that is going to depend on Congress. What can the president really promise to do on his own?
I think in some ways this may be the abortion, reproductive rights State of the Union address. This has been the issue that has catapulted Democrats across the country to victory since the Supreme Court overturned Roe. It's fascinating, as you mentioned earlier, Kailey, we have Supreme Court justices who are going to be in the audience. I'll be curious to see if they respond to his vision of what he would like to do, which is protect reproductive rights for women across the country. But I think what the president is going to do is say, I am, and the Democrats are, and some Republicans, the party that wants to save your freedom to choose. This should be a decision between a woman and her doctor, not the federal government and not the state governments. And, oh, by the way, if you elect these folks, they will do what they have tried to do in states across the country nationally. They will try to limit the freedom to choose.
And the Supreme Court justices are now indeed entering the chamber to applause from many members, all 9 of them now walking down the hall, Joe, and we expect that just moments from now, the president himself will make that very same walk.
That's right. It's really something to imagine, Kailey, Jeannie, and Rick, the president addressing this issue of reproductive rights with the Supreme Court justices who we're watching come in right now to be seated together, sitting right in front of him. Furthermore, among his guests, Latoria Beasley, a woman from Alabama who we talked about earlier, was awaiting an embryo transfer as part of her in vitro fertilization treatment when the state Supreme Court's ruling abruptly canceled the procedure. She'll be with the First Lady tonight. The president will look to real-world examples, people who were impacted by this decision. Kate Cox, a mother from Texas who had to travel out of state to receive an abortion, is also a guest of the White House tonight. To Jeannie's point, we're going to hear about the economy. We're going to hear about raising taxes on corporations and the wealthy. But this issue of abortion is something that has played out in real form from the midterms straight through special elections that we have covered together here the last 2 years, and it will be a major thrust of the speech this evening.
Absolutely, and we are just moments away, we expect, from the arrival of President Biden in the chamber after we've seen some, but not all, of the Supreme Court justices, in fact, entering here. In our final moments before we go to President Biden's speech, it's also worth noting that there will be a speech given after this. It will be the Republican response from the youngest woman ever to be elected as a Republican into the Senate, Katie Britt. Rick, does the president give this speech with that in mind, knowing he will be followed by someone much younger who is likely to try to draw a contrast with the president on his age in addition to on his policy?
Yeah, I think it'll obviously influence Senator Britt's speech probably much more than I think it's going to influence the president's speech. The president really has a job to do with connecting directly with Americans, and he's not going to assume anybody who watches his speech is going to watch the Republican response. But it's a great story to tell that the youngest woman ever elected to the United States Senate as a Republican is giving the response tonight. It's been applauded by both Republicans and Democrats alike. Think it was a brilliant move by the leadership to have her give the response. And I would say it's likely to get a lot more attention than the response typically gets.
Our reporter in the motorcade lets us know that the president has arrived here on Capitol Hill. We're now waiting for him to make his way into the building and up here to the chamber. Things are getting very quiet right now in Statuary Hall. And there's a group of folks right outside the door to the chamber. Cameras are up as they wait to get a glimpse of the president. We'll only see him for a moment as he walks into the chamber. That's when we'll hear the Sergeant-at-Arms introduce him, and we'll be off to the races. There's been a lot of talk about this being potentially a longer speech than usual because of questions about the president's age and energy level of stamina. Certainly something that Donald Trump has been talking about. And I don't know if that's a good thing, Jeannie Shanzano. These speeches can get pretty long already as we see him enter the Capitol now.
Yeah, they can get long, for all of our sakes. We hope that he doesn't go too long. But again, I have to say, nobody has sat through, by my estimation, more States of the Union than Joe Biden. He was in the Senate from 73 to 09. He was also in the White House from 09 to 17. And of course, he's in his fourth year as president. So about 50 years of listening to these or delivering them, either sitting in the dais or in the audience. So he should know better than all of us that he can't go too long and how important this speech is, and I'm sure he does know that.
Well, it feels like there might be a battle.
McFarland will be up soon. Kailey will be hearing from him in just a moment.
Absolutely, and we, of course, will then await the walk of the president down as we are continuing to see justices chatting on the floor, members still conversing with each other. There was an interesting moment earlier in which we saw Nancy Pelosi, of course, Speaker Emeritus, still a member of the House, but someone who stepped down as her leadership from her leadership position of that chamber, speaking with Mitch McConnell, who, of course, just last month announced that he, too, will step down as the Republican leader. It kind of speaks to this idea that there is something of a changing of the guard happening, at least in the Senate. But, of course, the president tonight will be making the case that the same man should remain in the Oval Office. As we have said many times, this is a campaign speech just as much as it is a State of the Union. And it's also worth noting, as we await the president, for a little bit of levity, that expelled Congressman George Santos is in the chamber tonight. Joe, did you catch a glimpse of him? I heard there are shiny shoes.
Glad you mentioned it. Just caught a glimpse of him here in the chamber. He did not walk past us here in Statuary Hall. But what a club to be in, Rick Davis. You maintain floor privileges even after you get fired. That's how it works.
Yeah, it's very cringeworthy sometimes to see what comes back to the House of Representatives. And I would say he's probably the only one who's ever walked through that dais with bedazzled collars on a formal event like this. So, look, I mean, it was a dark period during the House of Representatives that George Santos was able to get elected and wreak havoc there. Very rare chance in history that somebody would be expelled. So I guess there's no shame left left in Mudville when he returns to bat. So I think it's just one of those distractions from tonight's otherwise serious and important event.
Well, it is serious and important indeed. And Jeannie, as we await the president and we hear the chamber getting quieter and quieter, as we know the president has entered the Capitol, he should be passing through the doors any moment. It's worth keeping in mind that this president, who is now in an active general election campaign against, of course, Donald Trump, presumptively they will both be the nominees of their parties come the convention, is also speaking to Congress. And as Rick speaks about this idea that we saw a pretty disruptive time in which George Santos was actually expelled, is this about contrasting with Trump or contrasting with the Republican Party at large, and including those that are sitting in the chamber right now?
You know, I think it is both, but he is certainly going to make the case that the Republican Party today is Donald Trump's party, and it is. You know, Donald Trump led it as he was president. He has continued to have enormous holdover in his post-presidency era, and now he is securing even more hold over it today. As we saw, he is trying to put his daughter-in-law, for instance, in charge of the Republican Party, his right to do as soon-to-be presumptive nominee. So, you know, this is very much a chance for him to contrast this do-nothing, what he sees as MAGA, Trump-led Republican Party, with his own vision. And I would just say, guys, bedazzled has been in Congress before. Remember, William Rehnquist used to adorn his robes in Gilbert and Sullivan opera honors on the sleeves with bedazzled accoutrements, if you will. So, but I would not by any means say that he is anything like George Santos. I just raise it because he did like a bit of fashion himself, William Rehnquist.
That's a pretty good recall. We missed the stripes, Jeannie, and appreciate that. With live coverage here from Capitol Hill, I'm Joe Mathieu in Statuary Hall in the House of Representatives, just outside the chamber where this event is about to unfold. The president has arrived, as Kailey mentioned. The motorcade got here to the Capitol, and by the way, they did have to pass quite a number of pro-Palestinian protesters, we understand, on the way up to Capitol Hill today. This is something we're going to hear the president talking about, of course, his policies on Israel and Gaza, with many folks, potentially progressive Democrats, not happy with what they're hearing and seeing on the other side of the world and might not like what the president has to say about it. We frequently see Republicans and Democrats stand up for standing ovations en masse. You could see a more mixed crowd tonight when it comes to some of these issues. The president was supposed to be walking down that aisle by now. He's probably meeting with some folks behind the scenes, including his guests, who will sit with the First Lady, the second gentleman, also with them on the motorcade ride over, obviously, the Vice President Kamala Harris, as we've shown you and told you, is in the Speaker's rostrum with the Speaker of the House waiting for this to happen. Lawmakers are feeling pretty at ease. Those we've talked to coming in to the building this evening and on their way into the chamber seem to be in very high spirits. They're dressed up. This is a night out. This is something that they can tell their families about, and many of them, by the way, brought family members with them. We saw a lot of special guests this evening, in some cases bringing spouses, as we spoke earlier on the air with Shelley Moore Capito, or bringing their children. And Kailey, this could be remarkable. The senators in this chamber might still have work to do tonight. This is a speech that could go till, gosh, who knows, 11 o'clock. They may go back next door through the rostrum to vote on a spending plan that passed the House earlier and looks like it will pass the Senate. This is part of the two-tiered funding mechanism, the minibus that will keep the government running until our next deadline on March 22nd. I suspect, Kailey, the president's going to be taunting the Speaker a little bit about his inability to pass a long-term budget so far.
Yes, but surely he is eagerly awaiting the moment when he can sign that into law and actually avert a partial government shutdown that could begin at midnight tomorrow. Now, meantime, one of our reporters in the Capitol, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, reports that the president, walking through the Hall of Columns with the First Lady, Jill Biden, said it was good to see you all. To reporters, when asked how he was feeling, he said, great. Meantime, we know that former President Donald Trump is paying attention, has promised to be giving live reaction to this speech as Biden gives it. He has posted on Truth Social that the president is very substantially late. This is a quote, not a good start, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Jeannie, this is a late speech as it is. 9 p.m. starts, and now it's 9:08, and we still haven't seen the president walk into the hallway.
That's right. And, you know, the idea, I love that you're looking at Truth Social, Kailey. I just love it. And I love the fact that Donald Trump is now our fact checker. You know, anybody checking facts like Donald Trump.
And the second gentleman now entering the chamber, Joe.
That's right. He made his way over on the motorcade, so you know they're here. Indeed, we saw the president making his way through the corridor, but there are a number of folks to talk to before he makes his way in there, obviously. There's a massive group, I will say, that have congregated around the door to the chamber because everybody wants to get a picture of this at some point here in the next couple of moments when he walks in. Folks, of course, will start taking their seats. He's going to speak for likely a good hour. Last year, we clocked him at about an hour 13, if I remember your count, Kailey. So there'll be a question as to whether he can top it. What would make this thing a little bit longer is not only the standing ovations that we all spend time counting and obsessing over here and whether the left side or right side of the room is up or down, but the back and forth, the jostling with the hecklers that we saw last year. We mentioned this earlier. And if the president goes off the script, all bets are off. This could be an interesting affair, and it's one that he has been preparing for physically and mentally, we're told, for the past several days. He took a long weekend to Camp David. He did not speak the evening of Super Tuesday, which we all noted, even to thank his voters. He has been head down working on this speech with his advisors for the duration. And the chief of staff, Jeff Zients, as we now see the First Lady enter the room with her guests, Kailey. Jeff Zients is promising an energetic Joe Biden. So he's got a pretty high bar to top here tonight.
Yes, as Joe Biden enters the chamber, the First Lady getting a round of applause from those in attendance. Of course, we will await any moment now the arrival of President Biden as we hear the applause in the chamber at this time. And of course, it's worth noting you can keep following the president's remarks on the terminal. As of course here on Bloomberg TV and radio, the House Speaker now gaveling as we await the arrival of the president. Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Secretary of Defense, of course, testifying on Capitol Hill just last week following his departure that had many wondering about communication between the Pentagon and the White House, Kailey, for his surgery at Walter Reed. He seems to be moving well coming down the aisle this evening. Of course, the cabinet among the last to get in place before the president is introduced.
Absolutely, as we see the remainder of them coming down the aisle now, including Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, the acting Labor Secretary Julie Su coming into the chamber ahead of tomorrow's jobs report. And as we continue to see the cabinet filing in here, it's a pretty remarkable moment as we now wait at 9:11 p.m. Eastern for the president to begin this speech. Rick, you've talked about how critical this moment is for the president, as this is a campaign speech by and large, in addition to the State of the Union. What is he likely to be thinking in these final moments before he prepares to make this walk, to shake these hands as we are seeing his cabinet doing now, and ultimately walk up to that microphone and begin speaking to the American people?
You almost have to remind people that presidents are people too. They have the same kind of tensions. They get nervous. I haven't met a single politician who hadn't given a big speech, either a State of the Union or a convention speech accepting their party's nomination, where they didn't get nervous. They got jumpy. And you had to find things that you could do in the run-up to this moment to get them relaxed and get them at ease with themselves and with the speech. Obviously, you were just talking about how much practice that Joe Biden has given this speech. I mean, in lieu of actually talking to his supporters on Super Tuesday. And that's a calculation by him and the people around him to sort of ease his way into this thing, to make sure he's not distracted by other things. He's in the bubble now, and everything that happens between now and when this speech is over with have been gone over and over and over again, dozens of times with he and his team, in order to try and get the best possible performance out of him. I mean, this is as close to Hollywood as you're going to get in politics, and we're going to just see what kind of actor Joe Biden has turned out to be.
Absolutely right. As we get a view of the Attorney General and a very active House of Representatives here. Of course, a joint session of Congress as Jared Bernstein, the chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisors, a household name at least for Bloomberg viewers, also joins the group here in the chamber. I can tell you guys, the advance press that travel with the president, including Bloomberg's reporter in the motorcade, have made their way up here. They're right outside the door waiting for him. So this is any moment now. Once the chamber comes to a more restive moment, again, you'll see the Sergeant-at-Arms William McFarland, in his second year on this job, have the opportunity to introduce the president, which is a high honor for anyone in that position. You'll hear Mr. Speaker, remembering it was Mr. Speaker Kevin McCarthy a year ago. And it certainly reminds us, Kailey, of the wild changes that we have seen in this House of Representatives since then.
Yeah, and Joe, of course, as we've seen most of the president's cabinet now enter inside the chamber, the education secretary, we have just learned, is the designated survivor tonight. Secretary Cardona will not be in attendance. And Joe, we are seeing everyone in attendance now. The First Lady looking quite relaxed, laughing in her box with her guests. And we're seeing Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the floor. Of course, his purview, foreign policy, as we've mentioned, very likely to feature highly in this speech, not just when it comes to the issue of Ukraine and getting additional funding passed, but also Israel. And we know that protesters have been active in the ground surrounding the Capitol tonight, Joe, as you have reported. And that is one of the ways in which we are looking for Democrats' response to the president's speech tonight.
Well, that's right, Kailey. And, you know, we haven't mentioned Ukraine very much since we started a little while ago on Bloomberg TV and radio. You've got the Swedish Prime Minister also with the First Lady this evening as a special guest of the White House. And certainly the president will be pointing to the gallery for moments like this, when it comes time to reinforce a point, whether we're talking about Israel, Ukraine, issues like abortion and the economy. To put a face and a name on the story is something that has been a tool going back to Ronald Reagan, who I'm sure Rick Davis remembers following that 14th Street Bridge crash back then. It's become a hallmark, Rick, of these states of the Union.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everybody is sort of remembering the moments. And that's the real question tonight, is what will be the moment? Will be there something that he says about one of the guests in Dr. Joe Biden's box? Is it a story that he tells about a compelling event that has occurred, you know, in his presidency? Or is it just going to be a speech that sort of hammers home the accomplishments of his administration and his vision for the future? Sadly, those are not the things people usually take away from these things. And as we talked earlier, the one remarkable thing last year was when the president engaged a rebellious House Republican caucus who were hackling him on Social Security. And he cut a deal right there during the State of the Union to not touch Social Security. Advantage President Biden. So tonight will be full of surprises. And one of those will be the thing that we talk most about tomorrow.
I believe we just saw on the screen the parents of Evan Gershkovich, a Wall Street Journal reporter who is imprisoned in Russia. Now we see President Biden beginning to enter the chamber.
President of the United States.
Joe Biden has made his way into the hall, already smiling as he shakes hands and hugs supporters and, in some cases, political challengers. That's a long walk, and this is going to take a minute. Things started to loosen up here in Statuary Hall as he finally made his way into the building. So the clock is ticking here, guys, on first making his way to the rostrum, getting in position, getting the script in front of him, which has been placed in the rostrum, and then getting himself in position to deliver this address. The president's got a purple tie on this evening, a dark blue suit, and he is taking his time here, soaking up the moment that really does belong to him right now. We've heard repeatedly over the past couple of days of how important this is for not only the president of the United States to carve the path forward and telegraph the direction of the country, but also in this case, a candidate who is running for re-election. Imagine the cost of this kind of airtime if he were to buy this for a political ad that likely no one would watch. So this is the benefit of incumbency as we continue to hear. Kailey, this could take a minute based on the throngs surrounding Joe Biden right now.
Yeah, and of course, just behind him, we see the leadership of the House and Senate, the majority leader in the Senate. Of course, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Steve Scalise of the House, the number 2 Republican, is behind him, and Hakeem Jeffries, the House minority leader, is behind him as well. And I was mentioning before we saw the president enter that we also saw the parents of a journalist imprisoned in Russia. And as we talk about the issue of Ukraine and the ongoing war with Russia, Jeannie, it's worth keeping in mind, we have talked about how this tonight is the president addressing Congress. He is addressing American voters as he campaigns for re-election. But very likely he is addressing both allies and adversaries as well.
He absolutely is. And we know that they did invite Alexei Navalny's widow to the speech. She was unable to attend, the First Lady of Ukraine as well. But so it is something that the president wants to underscore, certainly. You know, the astonishing thing is that there was a not so recent past when support for Ukraine and opposition to what Vladimir Putin has done with Ukraine in terms of this war would have been something that would have been roundly applauded by Republicans and Democrats alike. But this is one of the things that Joe Biden wants to use to contrast, because, of course, we've all talked about the fact and noted that his opponent is famously very sort of soft on Vladimir Putin and other strongmen around the world. And Joe Biden wants to note that and raise the question as to what is going to happen in the world if we turn the country over to a Donald Trump. And we have allies around the world who have voiced concern about this. So to your point, Kailey, he's not just speaking to members of Congress and Americans, but he's speaking to our adversaries and our allies around the world in saying we have an interest, all of the people who love a free state and a free government, in casting a vote in November for Biden's team as opposed to the other opponent on the other side, who is famously America first.
And we're seeing the president now still slowly making his way down and taking selfies as he goes, in fact, Joe.
He sure is. It was an interesting moment there, Kailey, as we saw our first MAGA hat on the aisle. That was Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. It looked like Gwen Moore was running defense for Joe Biden there for a moment. She handed him something. Did you get a glimpse of that?
It looked like it was a Laken Riley pin, and Marjorie Taylor Greene herself was wearing a Laken Riley shirt. Of course, this was a college student who was tragically killed by, it turns out, someone who is in the country undocumented illegally, and really has become kind of a resounding call on the Republican side to address the issue of the border and immigration. The House, of course, passed the Laken Riley Act just this week. And, Joe, it speaks to the issue of the border and how that is something that is going to be unavoidable for President Biden in this speech tonight.
Joe Biden talking with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York. I see his friend from Delaware, Chris Coons, there as well, formerly spending some time with Jim McGovern, the Democrat from Massachusetts, who's ranking member on the Rules Committee that has been in a bit of disarray in the most recent tussle over budgeting and attempts to move any legislation in this House of Representatives. We have to remember, this is where the president's supplemental budget request for Ukraine, for Israel, Taiwan, that included what we were told was a generational breakthrough compromise on the border. This is the chamber where it went to die. It was DOA before it ever got here, actually, with the speaker making clear it would not get to the floor of the House. The president of the United States now standing in the chamber where this has become such a controversy that we've been talking about government shutdowns on a weekly basis. Though we can tell our listeners and viewers, if you're just joining us as part of our special State of the Union coverage, the House has passed a bill to keep the government functioning the next couple of weeks, and the Senate could pass it as soon as tonight. Now, this becomes the campaign part of the evening, I guess, Kailey, because we're already hearing chants of 4 more years in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, on the Democratic side, with claps to go along with it, as we see the president now greeting the Supreme Court, just shook the hand of the Chief Justice, John Roberts, making his way now down the line as he gets closer and closer to that lectern. Worth noting, it is now 9:23 p.m. We are a little late in the evening as this speech begins. And once again, Rick, it brings us to the question of just how long the president will want to go this evening, if he's going to want to show that stamina to deliver a long speech, or if he's looking for the bites that are going to be circulating on social media tomorrow and used in his campaign ads going forward.
Yeah, it's probably all of the above, right? They're going to take the time that they deserve as President of the United States to dominate the airwaves tonight. This is his night. You don't want to shortchange it. But, you know, maybe there is a period of time where it just goes too long. I would say if it takes half as long as it took for him to get from the Capitol to the lectern, it would be quite an accomplishment, because we're now approaching almost 25 minutes, and we hope the speech is at least maybe an hour, a little bit more or less. I remember a year ago betting Jeannie Shanzano that I would take the under for an hour, because I didn't think Joe Biden could actually last for the hour to get that speech done. And, of course, she won the steak dinner since it was just over an hour and 15 minutes. So tonight, a lot of speculation about that. But as you point out, the real speech starts when you carve it up and send it out on the internet, and you're going to see social media just be all over the place. And, of course, I think we can rely on tonight Donald Trump getting a head start as he sits in his Barca lounger in Florida, you know, live tweeting the speech tonight. He'll be there a little bit ahead of everybody else.
We can tell our listeners and viewers Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Amy Coney Barrett are absent as we keep our eyes here on the justices who have chosen to attend this evening. Jeannie, is this part of the act as Joe Biden makes his way into the rostrum? Show people how affable you are, how you can shake hands, talk to folks for as long as you want?
It absolutely is. I think maybe he wants to get there quicker. I see he's there now. And by the way, I never got my steak from Rick Davis, so I'm still waiting for that.
Well, he's, of course, doing the traditional step here of giving his speech to the Speaker of the House and giving a copy to the Vice President. We're now seeing Joe Biden live in the Speaker's rostrum, facing a joint session of Congress. The room on its feet here, as we await his first words now on his last State of the Union address before the general election. Even the Vice President and Speaker are standing with the President of the United States. Kailey, this speech is about to begin.
Absolutely, as he looks up towards the First Lady's box. And we're hearing the voice of President Joe Biden now.
Good evening. Good evening. If I were smart, I'd go home now. Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, members of Congress, my fellow Americans, in January 1941, Franklin Roosevelt came to this chamber to speak to the nation, and he said, "I address you at a moment unprecedented in the history of the Union. Hitler was on the march. War was raging in Europe. President Roosevelt's purpose was to wake up Congress and alert the American people that this was no ordinary time. Freedom and democracy were under assault in the world. Tonight, I come to this same chamber to address the nation. Now, it's we who face an unprecedented moment in the history of the Union. And yes, my purpose tonight is to wake up the Congress and alert the American people that this is no ordinary moment either. Not since President Lincoln and the Civil War have freedom and democracy been under assault at home as they are today. What makes our moment rare is that freedom and democracy are under attack both at home and overseas at the very same time. Overseas, Putin of Russia is on the march, invading Ukraine and sowing chaos throughout Europe and beyond. If anybody in this room thinks Putin will stop at Ukraine, I assure you he will not. But Ukraine can stop Putin. Ukraine can stop Putin if we stand with Ukraine and provide the weapons that it needs to defend itself. That is all. That is all Ukraine is asking. They're not asking for American soldiers. In fact, there are no American soldiers at war in Ukraine, and I'm determined to keep it that way. But now, assistance to Ukraine is being blocked by those who want to walk away from our world leadership. It wasn't long ago when a Republican president named Ronald Reagan thundered, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Now, my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." That's a quote. A former president actually said that, bowing down to a Russian leader. I think it's outrageous, it's dangerous, and it's unacceptable. America is a founding member of NATO, the military alliance of democratic nations created after World War II to prevent war and keep the peace. And today, we've made NATO stronger than ever. We welcomed Finland to the alliance last year. And just this morning, Sweden officially joined, and their minister is here tonight. Come here, stand up. Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And they know how to fight. Mr. Prime Minister, welcome to NATO, the strongest military alliance the world has ever seen. I say this to Congress, we have to stand up to Putin. Send me a bipartisan national security bill. History is literally watching. History is watching. If the United States walks away, it will put Ukraine at risk. Europe is at risk. The free world will be at risk, emboldening others to do what they wish to do us harm. My message to President Putin, who I've known for a long time, is simple. We will not walk away. We will not bow down. I will not bow down. In a literal sense, history is watching. History is watching. Just like history watched 3 years ago on January 6th, when insurrectionists stormed this very Capitol and placed a dagger to the throat of American democracy. Many of you were here on that darkest of days. We all saw with our own eyes the insurrectionists were not patriots. They'd come to stop the peaceful transfer of power, to overturn the will of the people. January 6th lies about the 2020 election and the plots to steal the election posed a gravest threat to U.S. democracy since the Civil War. But they failed. America stood. America stood strong, and democracy prevailed. We must be honest. The threat to democracy must be defended. My predecessor and some of you here seek to bury the truth about January 6th. I will not do that. This is the moment to speak the truth and to bury the lies. Here's the simple truth. You can't love your country only when you win. As I've done ever since being elected to office, I ask all of you, without regard to party, to join together and defend democracy. Remember your oath of office of defending against all threats, foreign and domestic. Respect free and fair elections. Restore trust in our institutions. It's not hyperbole to suggest history is watching. We're watching. Your children and grandchildren will read about this day and what we do. History is watching another assault on freedom. Joining us tonight is Latoya Beasley, a social worker from Birmingham, Alabama. 14 months ago, she and her husband welcomed a baby girl thanks to the miracle of IVF. She scheduled treatments to have that second child, but the Alabama Supreme Court shut down IVF treatments across the state, unleashed by a Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade. She was told her dream would have to wait. What her family had got through should never have happened. Unless Congress acts, it could happen again. So tonight, let's stand up for families like hers. To my friends across the aisle, don't keep this waiting any longer. Guarantee the right to AVF. Guarantee it nationwide. Like most Americans, I believe Roe v. Wade got it right. I thank Vice President Harris for being an incredible leader, defending reproductive freedom, and so much more. Thank you. My predecessor came to office determined to see Roe v. Wade overturned. He's the reason it was overturned, and he brags about it. Look at the chaos that has resulted. Joining us tonight is Kate Cox, the wife and mother from Dallas. She's become pregnant again and had a fetus of a fatal condition. Her doctor told Kate that her own life and her ability to have children in the future were at risk if she didn't act. Because Texas law banned her ability to act, Kate and her husband had to leave the state to get what she needed. What her family got through should have never happened as well, but it's happening in too many others. There are state laws banning the freedom to choose, criminalizing doctors, forcing survivors of rape and incest to leave their states to get the treatment they need. Many of you in this chamber and my predecessor are promising to pass a national ban on reproductive freedom. My God, what freedom else would you take away? Look, it's a decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court majority wrote the following, and with all due respect, justices, women are not without electoral power. Electoral or political power. You're about to realize just how much you're right about that. Those bragging about overturning Roe v. Wade have no clue about the power of women. But they found out when reproductive freedom was on the ballot. We won in 2022 and 2020, and we'll win again in 2024. If you, the American people, send me a Congress that supports the right to choose, I promise you, I'll restore Roe v. Wade as the law of the land again. Folks, America cannot go back. I'm here tonight to show what I believe is the way forward, because I know how far we come. 4 years ago next week, before I came to office, the country was hit by the worst pandemic and the worst economic crisis in a century. Remember the fear, record losses? Remember the spikes in crime and the murder rate, raging virus that took more than 1 million American lives, of loved ones, millions left behind? A mental health crisis of isolation and loneliness. A president, my predecessor, failed the most basic presidential duty that he owes to American people, the duty to care. I think that's unforgivable. I came to office determined to get us through one of the toughest periods in the nation's history. We have. It doesn't make news in 1,000 cities and towns. The American people are writing the greatest comeback story never told. So let's tell the story here. Tell it here and now. America's comeback is building the future of American possibilities, building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down. Investing in all America, in all Americans, to make sure everyone has a fair shot, and we leave no one behind. The pandemic no longer controls our lives. The vaccines that saved us from COVID are now being used to beat cancer, turning setback into comeback. That's what America does. That's what America does. Folks, my inherited economy is on the brink. Now our economy is literally the envy of the world. 15 million new jobs in just 3 years, a record, a record. Unemployment at 50-year lows. A record 16 million Americans are starting small businesses, and each one is a literal act of hope. With historic job growth and small business growth for Black and Hispanics and Asian Americans, 800,000 new manufacturing jobs in America and counting. Where is it written we can't be the manufacturing capital of the world? We are, and we will. More people have health insurance today. More people have health insurance today than ever before. The racial wealth gap is as small as it's been in 20 years. Wages keep going up. Inflation keeps coming down. Inflation has dropped from 9% to 3%, the lowest in the world, and tending lower. The landing is and will be soft. And now, instead of importing foreign products and exporting American jobs, we're exporting American products and creating American jobs. Right here in America, where they belong. And it takes time, but the American people are beginning to feel it. Consumer studies show consumer confidence is soaring. Buy America has been the law of the land since the 1930s. Past administrations, including my predecessor, including some Democrats as well in the past, failed to buy American. Not anymore. On my watch, federal projects that you fund, like helping build American roads, bridges, and highways, will be made with American products and built by American workers. Creating good-paying American jobs. And thanks to our CHIPS and Science Act, the United States is investing more in research and development than ever before. During the pandemic, a shortage of semiconductors, chips, that drove up the price of everything from cell phones to automobiles. And by the way, we invented those chips right here in America. Well, instead of having to import them, private companies are now investing billions of dollars to build new chip factories here in America, creating tens of thousands of jobs. Many of those jobs paying $100,000 a year and don't require a college degree. In fact, my policies have attracted $650 billion in private sector investment in clean energy, advanced manufacturing, creating tens of thousands of jobs here in America. And thanks to our bipartisan infrastructure law, 46,000 new projects have been announced all across your communities. And by the way, I noticed some of you strongly voted against it, or they're cheering on that money coming in. I like it. I'm with you. I'm with you. If any of you don't want that money in your district, just let me know. Modernizing our roads and bridges, ports and airports, public transit systems. Removing poisonous lead pipes so every child can drink clean water without risk of brain damage. Providing affordable high-speed internet for every American, no matter where you live, urban, suburban, or rural communities, in red states and blue states. Record investments in tribal communities. Because of my investment in family farms, because I invested in family farms led by my Secretary of Agriculture, who knows more about this than anybody I know, we're better able to stay in the family for those farms and their children and grandchildren won't have to leave home to make a living. It's transformative. The great comeback story is Belvidere, Illinois, home to an auto plant for nearly 60 years. Before I came to office, the plant was on its way to shutting down. Thousands of workers feared for their livelihoods. Hope was fading. Then I was elected to office, and we raised the Belvidere repeatedly with auto companies, knowing unions would make all the difference. The UAW worked like hell to keep the plant open and get these jobs back, and together we succeeded. Instead of auto factories shutting down, auto factories reopening, and new state-of-the-art battery factories being built to power those cars there at the same. The folks at Belvidere, I say, instead of your town being left behind, your community is moving forward again. Because instead of watching auto jobs in the future go overseas, 4,000 union jobs with higher wages are building the future in Belvidere right here in America. Here tonight is UAW President Shawn Fain, a great friend and a great labor leader. Shawn, where are you? Stand up. And Dawn Sims, a third-generation worker, UAW worker at Belvidere. Shawn, I was proud to be the first president to stand on the picket line, and today, Dawn has a good job in her hometown, providing stability for her family and pride and dignity as well. Showing once again, Wall Street didn't build America. They're not bad guys. They didn't build it, though. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. I say to the American people, when America gets knocked down, we get back up. We keep going. That's America. That's you, the American people. It's because of you America's coming back. It's because of you our future is brighter. It's because of you that tonight we can proudly say the state of our union is strong and getting stronger. Tonight, I want to talk about the future of possibilities that we can build together. A future where the days of trickle-down economics are over, and the wealthy and the biggest corporations no longer get all the tax breaks. And by the way, I understand corporations. I come from a state that has more corporations invested than every one of your states in the state of the United States combined. And I represented it for 36 years. I'm not anti-corporation, but I grew up in a home where trickle-down economics didn't put much on my dad's kitchen table. That's why I determined to turn things around so middle class does well. When they do well, the poor go way up and the wealthy still do very well. We all do well. And there's more to do to make sure you're feeling the benefits of all we're doing. Americans pay more for prescription drugs than anywhere in the world. It's wrong, and I'm ending it. was a law that I proposed and signed. Not one of you Republican buddies voted for it. We finally beat Big Pharma. Instead of paying $400 a month or thereabouts for insulin with diabetes, and it only costs $10 to make, they only get paid $35 a month now and still make a healthy profit. And I want to, but what to do next? I want to cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for every American who needs it. Everyone. For years, people have talked about it, but finally we got it done and gave Medicare the power to negotiate lower prices on prescription drugs, just like the VA is able to do for veterans. That's not just saving seniors money, it's saving taxpayers money. We cut the federal deficit by $160 billion. Because Medicare will no longer have to pay those exorbitant prices to Big Pharma. This year, Medicare is negotiating lower prices for some of the costliest drugs on the market to treat everything from heart disease to arthritis. It's now time to go further and give Medicare the power to negotiate lower prices for 500 different drugs over the next decade. They're making a lot of money, guys. And they'll still be extremely profitable. Will not only save lives, it will save taxpayers another $200 billion. Starting next year, the same law caps total prescription drug costs for seniors on Medicare at $2,000 a year, even for expensive cancer drugs that cost $10,000, $12,000, $15,000. Now I want to cap prescription drug costs at $2,000 a year for everyone. Folks, I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but if you want to get in Air Force One and fly to Toronto, Berlin, Moscow, even Moscow, probably. And bring your prescription with you, and I promise you I'll get it for you for 40% the cost you're paying now. Same company, same drug, same place. Folks, the Affordable Care Act, the old Obamacare, is still a very big deal. Over 100 million of you can no longer be denied health insurance because of pre-existing condition. Well, my predecessor and many in this chamber want to take this prescription drug away by repealing the Affordable Care Act. I'm not going to let that happen. We stopped you 50 times before and we'll stop you again. In fact, I'm not only protecting it, I'm expanding it. We enacted tax credits of $800 per person per year, reduce health care costs for millions of working families. That tax credit expires next year. I want to make that savings permanent. To state the obvious, women are more than half our population, but research on women's health has always been underfunded. That's why we're launching the first ever White House initiative on women's health research, led by Jill, doing an incredible job as First Lady. So pass my plan for $12 billion to transfer women's health research and benefit millions of lives all across America. I know the cost of housing is so important to you. If inflation keeps coming down, mortgage rates will come down as well, and the Fed acknowledges that. But I'm not waiting. I want to provide an annual tax credit that will give Americans $400 a month for the next 2 years as mortgage rates come down, to put toward their mortgages when they buy their first home or trade up for a little more space. Just for 2 years. And my administration is also eliminating title insurance on federally backed mortgages. When you refinance your home, you can save $1,000 or more as a consequence. For millions of renters, we're cracking down on big landlords who use antitrust law, who break antitrust laws by price fixing and driving up rents. We've cut red tape so builders can get federally financing, which is already helping build a record 1.7 million new housing units nationwide. Now pass and build and renovate 2 million affordable homes and bring those rents down. To remain the strongest economy in the world, we need to have the best education system in the world. And I suspect all of you, want to give every child, a good start by providing access to preschool for 3 and 4 years old. You know, I think I pointed out last year, that children coming from broken homes where there's no books, they're not read to, not spoken to very often, start school, kindergarten, or first grade, having heard 1 million fewer words spoken. Well, studies show that children who go to preschool are nearly 50% more likely to finish high school, go on to earn a 2- and 4-year degree, no matter what their background is. I met a year and a half ago with the leaders of the Business Roundtable. They were mad that they were angry. I think, well, they were discussing why I wanted to spend money on education. I pointed out to them as vice president, I met with over 182 of those folks. Don't hold me to the exact number. And I asked them what they need most, the CEOs. And you've had the same experience on both sides of the aisle. They say a better educated workforce, right? So I looked at them, and I say, I come from Delaware. DuPont used to be the 8th largest corporation in the world. And every new enterprise they bought, they educated the workforce to that enterprise. But none of you do that anymore. Why are you angry with me providing you the opportunity for the best educated workforce in the world? And they all looked at me and said, I think you're right. I want to expand high-quality tutoring and summer learning to see that every child learns to read by 3rd grade. I'm also connecting local businesses and high schools so students get hands-on experience and a path to a good-paying job, whether or not they go to college. And I want to make sure that college is more affordable. Let's continue increasing the Pell Grants to working and middle-class families and increase record investments in HBCUs and minority-serving institutions, including Hispanic institutions. When I was told I couldn't universally just change the way in which we dealt with student loans, I fixed 2 student loan programs that already existed to reduce the burden of student debt for nearly 4 million Americans, including nurses, firefighters, and others in public service. Like Keenan Jones, a public educator from Minnesota, who's here with us tonight. Keenan, where are you? Keenan, thank you. He's educated hundreds of students so they can go to college. Now he's able to help, after debt forgiveness, get his own daughter to college. And folks, look, such relief is good for the economy because folks are now able to buy a home, start a business, start a family. While we're at it, I want to give public school teachers a raise. And by the way, the first couple of years, we cut the deficit. Now, let me speak to the question of fundamental fairness for all Americans. I've been delivering real results in fiscally responsible ways. We've already cut the federal deficit. We've already cut the federal deficit over $1 trillion. I signed the bipartisan deal to cut another $1 trillion in the next decade. It's my goal to cut the federal deficit another $3 trillion by making big corporations and the very wealthy finally beginning to pay their fair share. Look, I'm a capitalist. If you want to make or can make $1 million or millions of bucks, that's great. Just pay your fair share in taxes. A fair tax code is how we invest things to make this country great. Healthcare, education, defense, and so much more. But here's the deal. The last administration enacted a $2 trillion tax cut, overwhelmingly benefit the top 1%, the very wealthy and the biggest corporations, and exploded the federal deficit. They added more to the national debt than any presidential term in American history. Check the numbers. Folks at home, does anybody really think the tax code is fair? Do you really think the wealthy and big corporations need another $2 trillion tax break? I sure don't. I'm going to keep fighting like hell to make it fair. Under my plan, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay an additional penny in federal taxes. Nobody, not one penny. And they haven't yet. In fact, the child tax credit I passed during the pandemic cut taxes for millions of working families and cut child poverty in half. Restore that child tax credit. No child should go hungry in this country. The way to make the tax code fair is to make big corporations and the very wealthy begin to pay their fair share. Remember in 2020, 55 of the biggest companies in America made $40 billion and paid zero in federal income tax. Zero. Not anymore. Thanks to the law I wrote and we signed, big companies have to pay a minimum of 15%. But that's still less than working people pay in federal taxes. It's time to raise corporate minimum tax to at least 21%. So every big corporation finally begins to pay their fair share. I also want to end tax breaks for big pharma, big oil, private jets, massive executive pay when it's only supposed to be $1 million that can be deducted. They can pay them $20 million if they want, but deduct $1 million. End it now. You know, there are 1,000 billionaires in America. You know what the average federal tax is for those billionaires? No. They're making great sacrifices, 8.2%. That's far less than the vast majority of Americans pay. No billionaire should pay a lower federal tax rate than a teacher, a sanitation worker, or a nurse. I propose a minimum tax for billionaires of 25%, just 25%. You know what that would raise? That would raise $500 billion over the next 10 years. And imagine what that could do for America. Imagine a future with affordable child care. Millions of families can get they need to go to work to help grow the economy. Imagine a future with paid leave, because no one should have to choose between working and taking care of their sick family member. Imagine the future of home care and elder care, and people living with disabilities, so they can stay in their homes and family caregivers can finally get the pay they deserve. Tonight, let's all agree once again to stand up for seniors. Many of my friends on the other side of the aisle want to put Social Security on the chopping block. If anyone here tries to cut Social Security or Medicare or raise the retirement age, I will stop you. The The working people who built this country pay more into Social Security than millionaires and billionaires do. It's not fair. We have two ways to go. Republicans can cut Social Security and give more tax breaks to the wealthy. That's the proposal. Oh, no. You guys don't want another $2 trillion tax cut? I kind of thought that's what your plan was. Well, that's good to hear. You're not going to cut another $2 trillion for the super wealthy. That's good to hear. I'll protect and strengthen Social Security and make the wealthy pay their fair share. Look. Too many corporations raise prices to pad their profits, charging more and more for less and less. That's why we're cracking down on corporations that engage in price gouging and deceptive pricing, from food to health care to housing. In fact, the snack companies think you won't notice if they change the size of the bag and put a hell of a lot fewer, same size bag, put fewer chips in it. No, I'm not joking. It's called shrinkflation. Pass Bobby Casey's bill and stop this. I really mean it. You probably all saw that commercial on Snickers bars. You get charged the same amount, and you got about, I don't know, 10% fewer Snickers in it. Look, I'm also getting rid of junk fees, those hidden fees at the end of your bill that are there without your knowledge. My administration announced we're cutting credit card late fees from $32 to $8. Banks and credit card companies are allowed to charge what it costs them to instigate the collection. And that's more, a hell of a lot, like $8 and 30-some dollars. They don't like it. The credit card companies don't like it. But I'm saving American families $20 billion a year with all the junk fees I'm eliminating. Folks at home, that's why the banks are so mad. It's $20 billion in profit. I'm not stopping there. My administration has proposed rules to make cable, travel, utilities, and online ticket sellers tell you the total price up front, so there are no surprises. It matters. It matters. And so does this. In November, my team began serious negotiation with a bipartisan group of senators. The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen. Oh, you don't think so? Oh, you don't like that bill, huh? That conservatives got together and said it was a good bill? I'll be darned. That's amazing. That bipartisan bill would hire 1,500 more security agents and officers, 100 more immigration judges to help tackle the backload of 2 million cases, 4,300 more asylum officers, and new policies so they can resolve cases in 6 months instead of 6 years now. What are you against? 100 more high-tech drug detection machines to significantly increase the ability to screen and stop vehicles smuggling fentanyl into America. That's killing thousands of children. This bill would save lives and bring order to the border. It will also give me and any new president new emergency authority to temporarily shut down the border when the number of migrants at the border is overwhelming. The Border Patrol Union has endorsed this bill. The Federal Chamber of Commerce is, yeah. You're saying low. Look at the facts. I know you know how to read. I believe that given the opportunity for a majority in the House and Senate would endorse the bill as well, a majority right now. But unfortunately, politics has derailed this bill so far. I'm told my predecessor called members of Congress in the Senate to demand they block the bill. He feels a political win. He viewed it as would be a political win for me and a political loser for him. It's not about him. It's not about me. I'd be a winner. Not really. Lincoln Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal. That's right. But how many of the thousands of people being killed by illegals? To her parents, I say, my heart goes out to you, having lost children myself. I understand. But look, if we change the dynamic at the border, people pay these smugglers $8,000 to get across the border because they know if they get by and let into the country, it's 6 to 8 years before they have a hearing. And it's worth taking the chance of the $8,000. But if it's only 6 weeks, the idea is it's highly unlikely that people will pay that money and come all that way, knowing that they'll be able to be kicked out quickly. Folks, I would respectfully suggest my Republican friends owe it to the American people, get this bill done. We need to act now. And if my predecessor is watching, instead of paying politics and pressuring members of Congress to block the bill, join me in telling the Congress to pass it. We can do it together. But that's what here's what he will not do. I will not demonize immigrants saying they are poison in the blood of our country. I will not separate families. I will not ban people because of their faith. Unlike my predecessor on my first day in office, I introduced a comprehensive bill to fix our immigration system. Take a look at it. It has all these and more. Secure the border. Provide a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, and so much more. But unlike my predecessor, I know who we are as Americans. We're the only nation in the world with a heart and soul that draws from old and new. Home to Native Americans, whose ancestors have been here for thousands of years. Home to people of from every place on earth. They came freely. Some came in chains. Some came when famine struck, like my ancestral family in Ireland. Some to flee persecution, to chase dreams that are impossible anywhere but here in America. That's America. And we all come from somewhere, but we're all American. Look, folks, we have a simple choice. We can fight about fixing the border, or we can fix it. I'm ready to fix it. Send me the border bill now. A transformational moment in history happened 59 years ago today in Selma, Alabama. Hundreds of foot soldiers for justice marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, named after the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan, to claim their fundamental right to vote. They were beaten, they were bloody, and left for dead. Our late friend and former colleague, John Lewis, was on that march. We miss him. Joining us tonight are other marchers, both in the gallery and on the floor, including Betty Mae Fikes, known as the voice of Selma. The daughter of gospel singers and preachers, she sang songs of prayer and protest on that bloody Sunday to help shake the nation's conscience. 5 months later, the Voting Rights Act passed and was signed into law. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But 59 years later, there are forces taking us back in time. Voter suppression, election subversion, unlimited dark money, extreme gerrymandering. John Lewis was a great friend to many of us here. But if you truly want to honor him and all the heroes who marched with him, then it's time to do more than talk. Pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Right Act. And stop denying another core value of America, our diversity across American life. Banning books, it's wrong. Instead of erasing history, let's make history. I want to protect fundamental rights. Pass the Equality Act. And my message to transgender Americans, I have your back. Pass the PRO Act for workers' rights. Raise the federal minimum wage, because every worker has a right to a decent living, more than $7 an hour. We're also making history by confronting the climate crisis, not denying it. I don't think any of you think there's no longer a climate crisis. At least I hope you don't. I'm taking the most significant action ever on climate in the history of the world. I'm cutting our carbon emissions in half by 2030, creating tens of thousands of clean energy jobs, like the IBEW work is building and installing 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations. Conserving 30% of America's lands and waters by 2030. And taking action on environmental justice, fence line communities smothered by the legacy of pollution. And pattern after the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps, I launched the Climate Corps to put 20,000 young people to work in the forefront of our clean energy future. I'll triple that number in a decade. To state the obvious, all Americans deserve the freedom to be safe. And America is safer today than when I took office. The year before I took office, murder rates went up 30%. 30% they went up. The biggest increase in history. It was then, through my American Rescue Plan, which every American voted against, I might add, we made the largest investment in public safety ever. Last year, the murder rate saw the sharpest decrease in history. Violent crime fell to one of its lowest levels in more than 50 years. But we have more to do. We have to help cities invest in more community police officers, more mental health workers, more community violence intervention. Give communities the tool to crack down on gun crime, retail crime, and carjacking. Keep building trust, as I've been doing by taking executive action on police reform and calling for it to be the law of the land. Directing my cabinet to review the federal classification of marijuana and expunging thousands of convictions for the mere possession, because no one should be jailed for simply using or have it on their record. Take on crimes of domestic violence. I'm ramping up the federal enforcement of the Violence Against Women Act that I proudly wrote when I was a senator, so we can finally end the scourge against women in America. There are other kinds of violence I want to stop. With us tonight is Jasmine, whose 9-year-old sister Jackie was murdered with 21 classmates and teachers in elementary school in Uvalde, Texas. Very soon after that happened, Jill and I went to Uvalde for a couple of days. We spent hours and hours with each of the families. We heard their message, so everyone in this room, in this chamber, could hear the same message. the constant refrain, and I was there for hours meeting with every family. They said, do something. Do something. Well, I did do something by establishing the first ever Office of Gun Violence Prevention in the White House, that the Vice President is leading the charge. Thank you for doing it. Meanwhile, my predecessor told the NRA he's proud he did nothing on guns when he was president. Oh. After another shooting in Iowa recently, he said, when asked what to do about it, he said, just get over it. There's his quote, just get over it. I say, stop it. Stop it, stop it, stop it. I'm proud we beat the NRA when I signed the most significant gun safety law in nearly 30 years because of this Congress. We now must beat the NRA again. I'm demanding a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Pass universal background checks. None of this. I taught the Second Amendment for 12 years. None of this violates the Second Amendment or vilifies responsible gun owners. You know, as we manage challenges at home, we're also managing crises abroad, including in the Middle East. I know the last 5 months have been gut-wrenching for so many people, for the Israeli people, for the Palestinian people, and so many here in America. This crisis began on October 7th with a massacre by a terrorist group called Hamas, as you all know. 1,200 innocent people, women and girls, men and boys, slaughtered after enduring sexual violence. The deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and 250 hostages taken. Here in this chamber tonight are families whose loved ones are still being held by Hamas. I pledge to all the families that we will not rest until we bring every one of your loved ones home. We also work around the clock to bring home Evan and Paul, Americans being unjustly detained by the Russians and others around the world. Israel has the right to go after Hamas. Hamas ended this conflict by releasing hostages, laying down arms, could end it by releasing the hostages, laying down arms, and surrendering those responsible for October 7th. But Israel has Israel has an added burden because Hamas hides and operates among the civilian population like cowards under hospitals, daycare centers, and all the like. Israel also has a fundamental responsibility, though, to protect innocent civilians in Gaza. This war has taken a greater toll on innocent civilians than all previous wars in Gaza combined. More than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed, most of whom are not Hamas. Thousands and thousands of innocent women and children, girls and boys, also orphaned. Nearly 2 million more Palestinians under bombardment or displacement. Homes destroyed, neighborhoods in rubble, cities in ruin. Families without food, water, medicine. It's heartbreaking. I've been working nonstop to establish an immediate ceasefire that would last for 6 weeks to get all the prisoners released, all the hostages released, to get the hostages home and ease the intolerable and humanitarian crisis and build toward an enduring, something more enduring. The United States has been leading international efforts to get more humanitarian assistance to Gaza. Tonight, I'm directing the U.S. military to lead an emergency mission to establish a temporary pier in the Mediterranean on the coast of Gaza that can receive large shipments carrying food, water, medicine, and temporary shelters. No U.S. boots will be on the ground A temporary pier will enable a massive increase in the amount of humanitarian assistance getting into Gaza every day. And Israel must do its part. Israel must allow more aid into Gaza to ensure humanitarian workers aren't caught in the crossfire. And they're announcing they're going to have a crossing in northern Gaza. To the leadership of Israel, I say this: humanitarian assistance cannot be a secondary consideration or a bargaining chip. Protecting and saving innocent lives has to be a priority. As we look to the future, the only real solution to the situation is a two-state solution over time. And I say this as a lifelong supporter of Israel. My entire career, no one has a stronger record with Israel than I do. I challenge any of you here. I'm the only American president to visit Israel in wartime. But there is no other path that guarantees Israel's security and democracy. There is no other path that guarantees that Palestinians can live in peace with peace and dignity. And there's no other path that guarantees peace between Israel and all of its neighbors, including Saudi Arabia, with whom I'm talking. Creating stability in the Middle East also means containing the threat posed by Iran. That's why I built a coalition of more than a dozen countries to defend international shipping and freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. I've ordered strikes to degrade the Houthi capability and defend U.S. forces in the region. As Commander-in-Chief, I will not hesitate to direct further measures to protect our people and our military personnel. For years, I've heard many of my Republican and Democratic friends say that China is on the rise and America is falling behind. They've got it backwards. I've been saying it for over 4 years, even when I wasn't president. America's rising. We have the best economy in the world. And since I've come to office, our GDP is up, our trade deficit with China is down to the lowest point in over a decade. And we're standing up against China's unfair economic practices. We're standing up for peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. I've revitalized our partnership and alliance in the Pacific. India, Australia, Japan, South Korea, Pacific Islands. I've made sure that the most advanced American technologies can't be used in China, not allowing to trade them there. Frankly, for all this tough talk on China, it never occurred to my predecessor to do any of that. I want competition with China, not conflict. And we're in a stronger position to win the conflict of the 21st century against China than anyone else, for that matter, than any time as well. Here at home, I've signed over 400 bipartisan bills, but there's more to pass my unity agenda. Strengthen penalties on fentanyl trafficking. You don't want to do that, huh? Pass bipartisan privacy legislation to protect our children online. Harness the promise of AI to protect us from peril. Ban AI voice impersonations and more. And keep our truly sacred obligation to train and equip those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they come home and when they don't. That's why the song Support and Help of Dennis and the VA, I signed the PACT Act. One of the most significant laws ever, helping millions of veterans exposed to toxins who now are battling more than 100 different cancers. Many of them don't come home, but we owe them and their families support. We owe it to ourselves to keep supporting our new health research agency called ARPA-H. And remind us that we can do big things, like end cancer as we know it, and we will. Let me close with this. Yay. I know you don't want to hear any more, Lindsay, but I got to say a few more things. I know it may not look like it, but I've been around a while. When you get to be my age, certain things become clearer than ever. I know the American story. Again and again, I've seen the contest between competing forces in the battle for the soul of our nation, between those who want to pull America back to the past and those who want to move America into the future. My lifetime has taught me to embrace freedom and democracy, a future based on core values that have defined America: honesty, decency, dignity, equality, to respect everyone, to give everyone a fair shot, to give hate no safe harbor. Now, other people my age see it differently. The American story of resentment, revenge, and retribution, that's not me. I was born amid World War II, when America stood for the freedom of the world. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and Claymont, Delaware, among working-class people who built this country. I watched in horror as two of my heroes, like many of you did, Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy, were assassinated. And their legacies inspired me to pursue a career in service. I left the law firm and became a public defender because my city of Wilmington was the only city in America occupied by the National Guard after Dr. King was assassinated because of the riots. And I became a county councilman almost by accident. I got elected to the United States Senate when I had no intention of running at age 29. Then vice president to our first black president. Now president to the first women vice president. In my career, I've been told I was too young. By the way, they didn't let me on the Senate elevators for votes sometimes. They're not a joke. And I've been told I'm too old. Whether young or old, I've always known what endures. I've known our North Star. The very idea of America is that we're all created equal and deserves to be treated equally throughout our lives. We've never fully lived up to that idea, but we've never walked away from it either. And I won't walk away from it now. I'm optimistic. I really am. I'm optimistic, Nancy. My fellow Americans, the issue facing our nation isn't how old we are. It's how old are our ideas. Hate, anger, revenge, retribution are the oldest of ideas. But you can't lead America with ancient ideas that only take us back. You lead America, the land of possibilities. You need a vision for the future and what can and should be done. Tonight you've heard mine. I see a future where defending democracy, you don't diminish it. I see a future where we restore the right to choose and protect our freedoms, not take them away. I see a future where the middle class finally has a fair shot and the wealthy have to pay their fair share in taxes. I see a future where we save the planet from the climate crisis and our country from gun violence. Above all, I see a future for all Americans. I see a country for all Americans. And I will always be president for all Americans because I believe in America. I believe in you, the American people. You're the reason we've never been more optimistic about our future than I am now. So let's build the future together. Let's remember who we are. We are the United States of America. And there is nothing beyond our capacity when we act together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
President Biden wrapping up a State of the Union address, his final before the election, in just over an hour's time, ending to thunderous applause, at least from Democrats in the room, and now shaking hands as he steps down from the Speaker's rostrum, having shaken hands with the still relatively new Speaker of the House, and saluting his colleagues as he steps down into the chamber. I'm Mathieu in Washington. This is special global coverage of the State of the Union address tonight in Washington, D.C. Kailey, Leinz, Rick Davis, and Jeannie Shanzano are with us in our Washington bureau as we try to unpack what we just heard. A laundry list, certainly, but also a tone from this president that was predicted from the White House. High energy, oomph behind the speech. He did manage to find spontaneous moments, Kailey, with a back and forth with none other than Marjorie Taylor Greene. It was the issue of the border that really seemed to light up Republicans tonight in this room.
Absolutely. Marjorie Taylor Greene confronting the president from across many rows of seats about Laken Riley, who we discussed earlier this evening, a college student in Georgia who was killed by a person who was in the country illegally. He did say Laken Riley's name. He addressed her parents, and leaning on the empathy we have often seen from this president, says he understands what it was like having lost children himself, what they must be experiencing. Interesting, though, that on the actual substantive issue of the border, which we knew was going to likely feature heavily into the speech, he didn't get to it until about 40 minutes in. He instead began with the issue of Ukraine, then moving to the issue of democracy. One of the big highlight lines in the first portion of the speech coming from the president, and he was alluding to his predecessor, said that you can't love your country only when you win. And Joe, he said that line after talking about January 6th. And from there, of course, we saw him touch on many other issues, abortion, the economy, and ending the speech this evening addressing what many see as one of his biggest weaknesses as he campaigns for a second term, his age. He said, I've been around a while, trying to play a joke about it, but then also said the issue facing our nation is not how old we are, it's how old our ideas are. And it was really toward the end of this speech that you saw Biden in campaign mode, not just addressing the American people in this Congress as president, but as someone who would like to stay president for another 4 years, Joe.
Yeah, Kailey, we heard him use that line on Late Night with Seth Meyers a couple weeks ago about whether your ideas are old, and he certainly delivered that here with some emphasis, as he did the money line of the night. The State of our Union, he said, is strong and getting stronger. Not everyone in the room agrees with that, of course, and I will tell you that in this statuary hall, all the lawmakers are now emerging from the chamber. Senators and members of the House are streaming by us here, and we're going to have conversations with some of them coming up here on Bloomberg for their impressions, as I mentioned, D's and R's, who sat through this, Kailey. And of course, we're now going to be hearing the official Republican response to this address tonight from the president.
Yeah, Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, of course, at 42 years old, the youngest woman Republican ever to be elected to the chamber, will shortly give the Republican response. And of course, we will be bringing you that response live on Bloomberg Television and radio. But we also do want to get the response of our political panel, who is still with us. Jeannie Shanzano of Iona University and Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, are still here with me at the Washington Bureau. And Jeannie, I would like to just begin with you. This speech was over an hour long. One of the big conversations we were having going into it is not what the president said, but how he said it being important. How would you rate his performance this evening, aside from the policy he outlined?
You know, I have to say, I think the performance itself, it was energetic. Joe used the word, he had a lot of oomph. I think it was raucous. He was interacting with members of Congress. And I think performance-wise, he may have been able to do what he did last year, which was to quell some of the doubts about his age and his ability. So I think from a performance perspective, I'm not sure that the White House or the campaign could have expected anything more from from this president. I think his experience showed this is Joe Biden in his element. He is, after all, a man of Congress, having served in this body from 73 to 2009, after which he went to the White House. So I think this was a night where, by performance standards, he did exceed a lot of expectations, and that's the way Joe Biden likes it. He feels like he's been underestimated for most of his political and professional career, and at those important moments, he has done what he needed to do, and I think tonight was one of those nights.
Rick, your impressions here of this address. Expectations were so high and made even higher by this White House that promised an energetic Joe Biden at 9 o'clock at night. And it sure seemed like we got one. You might not agree with everything he said, but Rick, he had the room in the palm of his hand for extended periods of time tonight, even achieved some back and forth, some call and response with Republicans. Did he meet his goals?
Yeah, I think he did. I mean, look at how he started this speech out. Extremely strong, high-paced, very strong wording around democracy, one of his favorite topics. They went with something that I think he thought he could get comfortable out and sound like he's really embraced it. I think we also saw the makings of the campaign speech. I mean, one of the things I always look at is what's happening in the first 15 minutes, because with all due respect, not everybody sits through the entire speech like we did tonight. And so you want to get the biggest audience around that key terms, and it was democracy, abortion rights, the pandemic comeback, the economy, and infrastructure. And I think after that, the rest of it was much more of a traditional State of the Union and less campaigning until the end. He used this opportunity to contrast over a dozen times with his predecessor, the unnamed man in this speech, Donald Trump. And I think it was very aggressive in that case. So I would say this speech was an offensive speech. It was him taking it to Donald Trump, defending the turf he's created for himself in his presidency, and talking to voters tonight, much more so than Congress, and much more so, frankly, than the foreign policy aspects of this. It was a domestic speech meant for the campaign.
Well, and Rick, as you talk about the idea that he was referencing his predecessor without directly naming him, he also said at one point in the speech that America cannot go back. I'm here tonight to show the way forward. And he went on at the end of the speech with a kind of laundry list of the way that he envisions the future. And I do believe we hear Joe Mathieu perhaps greeting a senator as they emerge from the chamber, and we'll bring you that conversation shortly. But when he talks about the way forward, something else he mentioned, Rick, was a unity agenda. Is that what this campaign is now going to be about? What is a unity agenda?
Yeah, I would say it was surprising to me because it was stuck literally at the end of the speech. Right as he was wrapping things up, he sort of sprung the unity agenda. He talked about bringing people home from conflicts around the world and taking care of them. He talked about AI. It didn't seem to have the sort of cohesiveness that the rest of the speech did. And frankly, I didn't take the speech as a unity speech. He wasn't asking Congress to sort of get together and work things out. He was advocating for his views. And he actually went after Republicans in the House a number of times when they rejected conservative plans like the immigration bill that came out of the Senate. So I think it must have been an afterthought or something that they tacked on to the end of the speech to try and keep a positive tone to the finish. But to be honest with you, I didn't really see how it fit into the speech.
All right, and we want to go now back to Joe in Statuary Hall, where he is joined by Senator Dick Durbin, the Senate Majority Whip. Joe.
Yeah, thanks, Kailey. Senator, it's great to see you, and welcome back to Bloomberg on this State of the Union night. I don't know how you managed to get out of the chamber there. The energy seemed high. We were promised a high-energy Joe Biden late at night. Did he pull that through for those who were in the room?
Absolutely, a home run. Strong ideas, strong presentation. Put to rest this notion that he's somehow an elderly man who can't handle the job. He showed real strength tonight on ideas that are important for America's future.
Yeah, interesting order in topics. We started on Ukraine. We heard about the economy, a lot of other issues before we ever got to the border. Senator, that seems to be the issue that lit up the room. It certainly has been driving the debate here with the president's supplemental emergency request. Did he make any headway there? Are you seeing half the room up, half the room down? And it really underscores the division.
2 out of 3 Americans know what's going on. There was a bipartisan bill proposed in the Senate, which the president supported. James Lankford of Oklahoma, a Republican senator, was the lead negotiator. We were ready to move forward on a bipartisan solution. Guess what happened? Donald Trump said, stop. We don't want to give Joe Biden a victory. Blame it on me, he said. Well, I am blaming it on him. He stopped any progress on a bipartisan solution. The president tonight said, stop giving your speeches on the Republican side about the border. Do something. Join me in passing this bill.
You're the majority whip, and you blame Donald Trump for what happened.
I certainly do. He said exactly that. I'm quoting him. Place the blame on me. He's the one who stopped the negotiations, stopped any effort for bipartisanship. So let's ignore him for a minute and solve the problem on a bipartisan basis.
Well, indeed, as the majority whip, you have a sense of the votes. I wonder if we're going to see a vote in the Senate, maybe even tonight, Senator, on this stopgap budget plan that passed the minibus, if we can call it that passed the House. Do you have work left tonight, or is that tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
Will it pass?
I think it will. I think the strong bipartisan support in the House is an indication of what's going to happen in the Senate.
This is the beginning of the general election, as many have called it. This is going to be Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. Americans need to start getting their minds around that.
Yes, they should. And it's important that they do, because this is a clear choice between Biden and Trump. We've seen this match before, but we understand the gravity of it after January 6th insurrection mob. I mean, the violence that President Trump initiated against this very building and the people who work in it should not be easily forgotten.
Senator Dick Durbin, thank you for spending time with us tonight on Bloomberg. It's good to see you on the State of the Union evening. Kailey, I'll send it back to you in the Bureau.
Joe, thank you very much. Of course, as we consider the Senate moving forward on funding the government, there do remain many open questions that Congress still have to deal with, many of which the president spoke about this evening, not just including the bipartisan border measure that he was encouraging be revived, if you will, after it was very quickly killed shortly after the announcement, but also on the issue of Ukraine. He touched as well on Israel, remembering that funding for these two allies are wrapped together in a supplemental national security package that has indeed passed the Senate. And Jeannie, leading up to this speech, especially in light of the fact that we were just talking about the unity agenda, if you will, there's the question of unity between the different parties. Sure. There's also the question of unity within the party. And within the Democratic Party, the issue of Israel is perhaps one of the more divisive ones. How do you think the president handled that tonight? Did he do a good job of bridging the gap between, or bridging the divide, if you will, from being supportive of Israel, but also trying to be supportive of Palestinian life in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, he's in a really tough position. He is getting a lot of pushback from his own party, as you mentioned, Kailey. We even saw two members in the House tonight hold up a sign to Democrats saying ceasefire now. So he is getting that pushback. We saw it on Super Tuesday with the number of uncommitteds in places like Minnesota. So the president knows he's walking this line. As he described himself in this speech, he has been one of the closest friends of Israel for most of his career. But at this point, he is trying to do both, support Israel in their fight against Hamas and also make the case that they have to be cognizant of the impact they are having on innocent men, women, and children in Palestine. He took the number 30,000 dead, according to the health ministry over there, that's been conflicting a lot of people. And he said, we are going to take steps to do better. I don't know how it's going to play on the Democratic left. This is an issue of real concern also to young people, not just Arab Americans.
Well, and Jeannie, as you mentioned, we saw that uncommitted vote showing up in Minnesota. We also saw it showing up in Michigan first. And on that note, we are joined now by a congresswoman from Michigan. Representative Haley Stevens is standing by with Joe. Joe?
Yeah, Kailey, we are here with Haley Stevens, who is no stranger to this network. And Congresswoman, it's great to see you as a Democrat from Michigan supporting Joe Biden tonight. What were your thoughts on his closing remarks about Israel? He called for a two-state solution. Coming off of the uncommitted movement we've seen in your state, in Minnesota, and others on Super Tuesday, did he say enough?
He absolutely said the right things on Israel tonight. And personally, I'm here with Liz Naftali, who is the great aunt of 4-year-old Abigail, who was taken hostage for 50 days when she was 3 years old. She lost both of her parents. There are so many other hostage families in the room here tonight. And as the task force co-chair, alongside Republican French Hill, for American hostages, that was one of the most sobering pieces of his really resounding and comprehensive speech. And it was a speech of vision, and it was a speech of setting goals. And what he said about getting to a two-state solution is still going to be the goal. There is lots of pain. There's lots that we're navigating. A terrorist operation in Gaza, known as Hamas, has not served its people well. And we need to find peace, and that will come when Hamas surrenders.
Are you disappointed he was not able to announce a ceasefire tonight? That was a hope of the administration.
Well, I know he's worked so hard. He said he's working with Saudi Arabia. He's working alongside Israel, certainly. They presented a deal. It was rejected by Hamas. We need answers. We need these remaining hostages, over 153 days there, to come home. That was an attack on humanity. And we also need to see aid delivered to Palestinians, which the president made a point of. We know that Hamas is preventing aid from coming in. We know that where this conflict is as well, is preventing aid for innocent Palestinians, mothers and children. And so that's why he said we're setting up a special envoy in the sea to make sure that aid gets delivered with no American troops, certainly on the ground in Gaza.
We're, of course, waiting for the Republican response to the president's address. Before we wrap up this evening, Sean Fain from the UAW was with the First Lady tonight, called out by Joe Biden. We've talked about this before, Congresswoman. The rank and file in this union, in many cases, are voting for Donald Trump. What's the message that they heard tonight from this president, or that you hoped they heard?
Well, certainly he delivered a very strong and resounding commitment to American manufacturing, to solving supply chain issues, to investing in education and skills training. But here's the thing. Joe Biden's coming to Michigan next week. He's going to be digging deep. He's going to be making sure that these union members know who he is, that he's the tough guy in the room, and he's also the honest guy in the room that has a commitment to protecting freedoms, to standing up for job creation, and making sure that our middle class is at the table while we do it. And that's why Sean Fain was here tonight. I was so thrilled to see him get a shout out. Can't wait to have the president back in Michigan.
Well, come talk to us again when you get back to Michigan, Congresswoman. It's great to see you. Haley Stevens, the Democrat from Michigan, with us as part of our special coverage here. Kailey, this is the message that starts now. Rick and Jeannie were talking about this, not just members of the cabinet, but the president's Democratic allies fan out across the country to deliver this message starting tomorrow.
Absolutely, as we are now, for all intents and purposes, in the general election, and President Biden is very likely to be up against former President Donald Trump 8 months from now on the ballot in November. And on that point, we did have reaction to the former president during the course of the State of the Union speech. And Donald Trump points out, Rick, it took him over 20 minutes to get to immigration, and then, in Trump's words, said nothing about it. Did he say enough about this subject this evening? Is the former president right?
Well, we were wondering if anybody was going to sleep through the speech, and it's pretty clear maybe President Trump did. I think that the piece on immigration was very interesting, and I thought one of the most engaging parts, because it was where he actually took up a discussion directly with Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yes.
And engaged with her, and it was an ad-lib portion of the speech, and she was pushing in a very aggressive way for him to say Laken Riley's name, right? Say the name. The pin that he had taken from her as he came into the hall was next to his dais, and he picked it up and held it up, and he said the name, and he did something that I think is going to create a little bit of a backlash. So he may have said a lot more than Donald Trump thought he did, and that was he referred to illegals, and that was a term that he hasn't really used in reference to migrants coming across the border. And we already see across the internet some of the more progressive groups within his coalition basically pushing back over this portion of the speech. So what's interesting is Donald Trump and the progressives in the Democratic wing seem to have something in common, which is the president sounded more conservative by defending the bill in the Senate that didn't get a hearing in the House, and that was something that always ruffled the feathers of the Democrats in the House, too. So I think that's going to be one of the things we're talking about for days to come, is this sort of very aggressive approach he took on immigration in this speech.
And it's worth noting, as we discuss Laken Riley in particular, the individual who has allegedly committed that crime has not yet been convicted, and we should keep that in mind. There was an interesting moment in the speech as well during the conversation around the border, Jeannie, when the president was talking about the bipartisan deal. One of the negotiators of that deal on the Republican side, Senator James Lankford, mouthed, "It's true," when the president was talking about the attributes. Everybody else on the Republican side of the chamber didn't really seem to have much reaction, but I thought that was a very interesting moment, Jeannie.
Yeah, it absolutely was. And
Yeah.
you
Good
know,
evening,
I see Katie Britt.
My name
And yeah,
is
we're seeing Senator Katie Britt now.
I have the honor of serving the people of the great state of Alabama in the United States Senate. However, that's not the job that matters most. I am a proud wife and mom of 2 school-aged kids. My daughter Bennett and my son Ridgway are why I ran for the Senate. I'm worried about their future and the future of children in every corner of our nation. And that's why I invited you into our home tonight. Like so many families across America, my husband Wesley and I just watched President Biden's State of the Union address from our living room. And what we saw was the performance of a permanent politician who has actually been in office for longer than I've been alive. One thing was quite clear, though. President Biden just doesn't get it. He's out of touch. Under his administration, families are worse off, our communities are less safe, and our country is less secure. I just wish he understood what real families are facing around kitchen tables just like this one. You know, this is where our family has tough conversations. It's where we make hard decisions. It's where we share the good, the bad, and the ugly of our days. It's where we laugh together. And it's where we hold each other's hands and pray for God's guidance. And many nights, to be honest, it's where Wesley and I worry. I know we're not alone. And so tonight, the American family needs to have a tough conversation, because the truth is, we're all worried about the future of our nation. The country we know and love seems to be slipping away, and it feels like the next generation will have fewer opportunities and less freedoms than we did. I worry my own children may not even get a shot at living their American dreams. My American dream allowed me, the daughter of 2 small business owners from rural Enterprise, Alabama, to be elected to the United States Senate at the age of 40. Growing up, sweeping the floor at my dad's hardware store and cleaning the bathroom at my mom's dance studio, I never could have imagined what my story would entail. To think about what the American dream can do across just one generation, in just one lifetime, it's truly breathtaking. But right now, the American dream has turned into a nightmare for so many families. The true, unvarnished state of our union begins and ends with this. Our families are hurting. Our country can do better. And you don't have to look any further than the crisis at our southern border to see it. President Biden inherited the most secure border of all time. But minutes after taking office, he suspended all deportations, he halted construction of the border wall, and he announced a plan to give amnesty to millions. We know that President Biden didn't just create this border crisis. He invited it with 94 executive actions in his first 100 days. When I took office, I took a different approach. I traveled to the Del Rio sector of Texas. That's where I spoke to a woman who shared her story with me. She had been sex trafficked by the cartels starting at the age of 12. She told me not just that she was raped every day, but how many times a day she was raped. The cartels put her on a mattress in a shoebox of a room, and they sent men through that door over and over again for hours and hours on end. we wouldn't be okay with this happening in a third world country. This is the United States of America, and it is past time, in my opinion, that we start acting like it. President Biden's border policies are a disgrace. This crisis is despicable. And the truth is, it is almost entirely preventable. From fentanyl poisonings to horrific murders, there are empty chairs tonight at kitchen tables just like this one because of President Biden's senseless border policies. Just think about Laken Riley. In my neighboring state of Georgia, this beautiful 22-year-old nursing student went out on a jog one morning, but she never got the opportunity to return home. She was brutally murdered by one of the millions of illegal border crossers President Biden chose to release into our homeland. Y'all, as a mom, I can't quit thinking about this. I mean, this could have been my daughter. This could have been yours. And tonight, President Biden finally said her name. But he refused to take responsibility for his own actions. Mr. President, enough is enough. Innocent Americans are dying, and you only have yourself to blame. Fulfill your oath of office, reverse your policies, end this crisis, and stop the suffering. Sadly, we know that President Biden's failures don't stop there. His reckless spending dug our economy into a hole and sent the cost of living through the roof. We have the worst inflation in 40 years and the highest credit card debt in our nation's history. Let that sink in. Hardworking families are struggling to make ends meet today, and with soaring mortgage rates and sky-high childcare costs, they're also struggling to how to plan for tomorrow. The American people are scraping by, while President Biden proudly proclaims that Bidenomics is working. Goodness, y'all, bless his heart, we know better. I'll never forget stopping at a gas station in Chilton County one evening. The gentleman working the counter told me that after retiring, he had to pick up a job in his 70s so that he didn't have to choose between going hungry or going without his medication. He said, I did everything right. I did everything I was told to do. I worked hard, I saved, I was responsible. He's not alone. I hear similar concerns from fellow parents, whether I am walking with my friends or whether I'm at my kids' games. But let's be honest, it's been a minute since Joe Biden pumped gas, ran a carpool, or even pushed a grocery cart. Meanwhile, the rest of us see our dollar and we know it doesn't go as far. We see it every day. And despite what he tells you, our communities are not safer. For years, the left has coddled criminals and defunded the police, all while letting repeat offenders walk free. The result is tragic, but foreseeable. From our small towns to America's most iconic city streets, life is getting more and more dangerous. And unfortunately, President Biden's weakness isn't just hurting families here at home. He is making us a punchline on the world stage. Look, where I'm from, your word is your bond. But for 3 years, the president has demonstrated that America's word doesn't mean what it used to. From abandoning our allies in his disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan to desperately pushing another dangerous deal with Iran, President Biden has failed. We've become a nation in retreat, and the enemies of freedom, they see an opportunity. Putin's brutal aggression in Europe has put our allies on the brink. Iran's terrorist proxies have slaughtered Israeli, Jews, and American citizens. They've targeted commercial shipping, and they've attacked our troops nearly 200 times since October, killing 3 U.S. soldiers and 2 Navy SEALs. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party is undercutting America's workers. China is buying up our farmland, spying on our military installations, and spreading propaganda through the likes of TikTok. You see, the CCP knows that if it conquers the minds of our next generation, it conquers America. And what does President Biden do? Well, he bans TikTok for government employees, but creates an account for his own campaign. Y'all, you can't make this stuff up. Look, we all recall when presidents faced national security threats with strength and resolve. That seems like ancient history. Right now, our commander-in-chief is not in command. The free world deserves better than a dithering and diminished leader. America deserves leaders who recognize that secure borders, stable prices, safe streets, and a strong defense are actually the cornerstones of a great nation. Just ask yourself, are you better off now than you were 3 years ago? There's no doubt we're at a crossroads, and it doesn't have to be this way. We all feel it. But here's the good news. We, the people, are still in the driver's seat. We get to decide whether our future will grow brighter or whether we'll settle for an America in decline. Well, I know which choice our children deserve, and I know the choice the Republican Party is fighting for. We are the party of hard-working parents and families, and we want to give you and your children the opportunities to thrive. And we want families to grow. It's why we strongly support continued nationwide access to in vitro fertilization. We want to help loving moms and dads bring precious life into this world. Wesley and I believe there is no greater blessing in life than our children. And that's why tonight I want to make a direct appeal to the parents out there, and in particular to my fellow moms, many of whom I know will be up tossing and turning at 2 a.m., wondering how you're going to be in 3 places at once and then somehow still get dinner on the table. First of all, we see you, we hear you, and we stand with you. I know you're frustrated. I know you're probably disgusted by most of what you see going on in Washington, and I'll be really honest with you, you're not wrong for feeling that way. Look, I get it. The task in front of us isn't an easy one, but I can promise you one thing. It is worth it. So I am asking you, for the sake of your kids and your grandkids, get into the arena. Every generation has been called to do hard things. American greatness rests in the fact that we always answer that call. It's who we are. Never forget, we are steeped in the blood of patriots who overthrew the most powerful empire in the world. We walk in the footsteps of pioneers who tamed the wild. We now carry forward the same flame of freedom as the liberators of an oppressed Europe. We continue to draw courage from those who bent the moral arc of the universe. And when we gaze upon the heavens, never forget that our DNA contains the same ingenuity that put man on the moon. America has been tested before, and every single time we've emerged unbowed and unbroken. Our history has been written with the grit of men and women who got knocked down. But we know their stories because they did not stay down. We are here because they stood back up. So now it's our turn, our moment to stand up and prove ourselves worthy of protecting the American dream. Together, we can reawaken the heroic spirit of a great nation. Because America, we don't just have a rendezvous with destiny. We take destiny's hand and we lead it. Our future starts around kitchen tables just like this, with moms and dads just like you. And you are why I believe with every fiber of my being that despite the current state of our union, our best days are still ahead. May God bless you, and may God continue to bless these United States of America.
Live sound from Senator Kailey Britt, the senator from Alabama, delivering the official Republican response to Joe Biden's State of the Union address. Impassioned and at times emotional, describing an America beset with illegal immigration and inflation, yet one that she says still carries opportunities ahead. I'm Mathieu in Statuary Hall in the House of Representatives. Having just heard from the president and Senator Britt, we're joined now by Congressman Brian Stile, the Republican from Wisconsin, was in the room, a member of the Financial Services Committee here in the House and chair of the Admin Committee. Congressman Stile, it's great to see you. Where to begin after a response like that? You were in the room for Joe Biden's address. Did he speak to you as a Republican lawmaker when he talked about his unity agenda?
I think the president really missed the opportunity to speak with emotion, as Senator Britt just did, about two of the most important issues of the day: the way that illegal immigration is impacting American families across the country, and the way that inflation, cumulatively 17%, is impacting families' ability to afford the things that they need. I think his comments on the economic policies were pretty disingenuous at times, commenting about the size of a Snickers bar or the amount of chips in a bag, rather than talking about the way that things being 17% more expensive than when he took office are impacting families who are struggling to get by.
You know, we talk about inflation a lot when you're on with us, Congressman. Jay Powell testified the last 2 days on Capitol Hill, and he seemed to be pretty optimistic about the fight against inflation, to the point where we're talking about interest rate cuts at some point this year. Would that not be a sign of success in that fight?
Inflation is coming down, but the cumulative impact on families is still quite real. You come to a grocery store in Wisconsin at the checkout counter with me, and you'll hear time and again that families are struggling to be able to afford the things that they need. We've made progress on the fight against inflation, but we're still dealing with the fact that this administration spent trillions of dollars after the end of the pandemic.
Will you be on the trail in this campaign to help Donald Trump deliver his message?
Wisconsin's going to be front and center in the contrast in policy between President Biden and President Trump. couldn't be more clear. The president doubled down on his policies of keeping the U.S.-Mexico border unsecure and refusing to address the fact that inflation is clobbering families across the country.
Congressman Brian Stile, Republican from Wisconsin, we thank you for the insights. Kailey, that's just a sense of the Republican response here in the room to what we heard from the president tonight in that speech that lasted over an hour, his big opportunity between now and the convention.
Absolutely, and we want to get final thoughts now with our political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, who are back with me here in Washington. Rick, just quickly, does President Biden leave tonight in a better position than he entered it?
Yeah, absolutely. He was able to start the campaign with a full enunciation of his priorities for the general election. It's, democracy, abortion rights, the economy, and infrastructure. He's ready to take it to Donald Trump. Katie Britt gave the response. That's the Donald Trump campaign.
Jeannie, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think performance-wise, Joe Biden did everything he needed to do. Republicans who were hoping that he makes an error have to be disappointed because he did not, and Democrats seem to be widely enthusiastic. He is the Joe Biden they wanted to see. He was interacting with members. He was, open. He was energetic. So a good performance night for Joe Biden.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, thank you so much for being with us on the State of the Union evening, and thank you to all of you listening on radio and watching on television for joining us for this special coverage of the State of the Union address and the Republican response on Bloomberg TV and radio. For Joe Mathieu at Capitol Hill, I'm Kailey Leinz in Washington. This is Bloomberg.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, Middle East and Africa. I'm Bonnie Quinn in Dubai. We just heard from Republican Senator Katie Britt, and before that, President Joe Biden. He used his State of the Union address to warn that democracy is endangered at home and abroad.
Walks away. It will put Ukraine at risk. Europe is at risk. The free world will be at risk, emboldening others to do what they wish to do us harm. My message to President Putin, who I've known for a long time, is simple. We will not walk away.
Let's bring in Bloomberg's Bill Farries now for some context. So, Bill, what was President Biden's key message on global issues such as the war in Ukraine, for example?
Well, as you saw there, he kicked off his speech, a 66-minute speech, by talking immediately about what he said was the threat to democracy at home and abroad. Abroad, specifically, he was talking about Ukraine. He said the U.S. Congress needed to approve that $60 billion aid package that's been languishing since really late last year. And he said to the opponents of that legislation in the Congress that Vladimir Putin would not stop if he succeeds in Ukraine, that he would go on to other countries. That bill, as you know, is passed the Senate. It's been held up in the House. It's a smaller group of Republicans, a smaller but growing group of Republicans who have opposed that. It's still not clear if or when that legislation will pass. He also went on and later on in the speech just made small mention of China, actually. He said he wants to focus on competition, not conflict with China. He criticized his predecessor, Donald Trump, for not enacting tougher legislation to block high-technology exports to China. He said that's something that his administration has done to make sure the U.S. maintains a technological edge.
And Bill, how much of this 66-minute speech was a political pitch to voters ahead of the November election?
Probably all 66 minutes, really. It was a unique opportunity for President Biden to have a microphone to himself, not have to take questions, and to address the American people, really to kind of reframe or set the debate for the political campaign ahead. He hit a lot of the key domestic issues that voters are likely to focus on, issues including immigration, abortion rights, the economy, inflation, a whole range of things that are expected to be hot-button topics going forward. And to try to contest that, you had Donald Trump posting on his social media site, Truth Social, kind of throughout the speech. So this was very much a political speech aimed at trying to win over voters who may, frankly, not be paying that much attention to the election now, but will be hearing a lot about it in the coming 7.5, 8 months.
Yeah, for sure. Bill, thank you so much for all that context. Much appreciated. That's Bloomberg's Bill Farries there. And another issue that the president spoke about directing the U.S. military to establish a temporary port on the Gaza coast to ramp up the delivery of aid and ease the humanitarian crisis in the territory, sparked, of course, by the Israel-Hamas war. That will have resonated with Michigan voters in particular. Let's get more now, though, on these steps from Bloomberg's Dana Kreisch. So what exactly has Biden announced, Dana?
Good morning from Dubai. President Biden dedicated a good chunk of that address to what's happening in the region, particularly the Israeli-Hamas war. He said Israel has a fundamental responsibility to protect civilians. He was saying that more than 30 Palestinians have been killed. He talked a lot about the dire humanitarian situation there, saying it was heartbreaking. He also said he was working on a ceasefire, a 6-week ceasefire to end the war in Gaza. He also spoke about an enduring peace in the region, and he mentioned that he is in talks with Saudi Arabia, of course, about potentially normalizing ties with Israel. Now, the most important thing was that he was saying that he will direct the U.S. military to lead a mission to establish a port on the Mediterranean coast to increase assistance to Gaza, humanitarian assistance, and saying that Israel also must do its part to allow more aid into Gaza. But the important bit was that they want to establish some sort of a port to increase aid assistance and into Gaza.
Yeah, a phenomenal increase in aid, as you say. Dana, thank you so much for joining us. That's Bloomberg's Dana